The air in New York City was crisp that morning, the streets bustling with the typical energy of the city. People rushing, cars honking, the sound of a distant saxophone playing jazz in the background. The usual buzz of the city was a stark contrast to the quiet tension hanging in the air as Donald Trump walked down Fifth Avenue, his face set in a familiar, stern expression. He was used to being in the spotlight, but today, something felt different. Trump's day had been scheduled to perfection. Meetings, speeches, handshakes. But as he walked past the busy storefronts, a figure in the distance caught his eye. At first glance, he assumed it was just another homeless man, huddled in the shadows of a doorway, asking for change. But something about him was different. There was an aura of dignity, an almost defiant stillness to him, as if he had seen more than most people could ever understand. As Trump approached, he found himself slowing down, curiosity piqued. The man was dressed in tattered military clothes, a faded army jacket, boots worn down by years on the streets, and a cap that had seen better days. But it wasn't the clothes that held Trump's attention. It was the man's eyes, deep, haunted, and sharp. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He sat on a weathered crate, his gaze fixed on the busy street, lost in thought. But Trump, driven by an instinct he couldn't quite explain, stopped in front of him. The world around them seemed to pause. For a moment, it was just the two of them in the middle of the street, the noise of the city muffled like a distant echo. "Hey," Trump said, his voice cutting through the silence. Ethan slowly lifted his head, his eyes locking with Trump's. For a split second, Trump felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected. The usual cynicism he felt towards the homeless melted away, replaced by a strange mixture of curiosity and respect. "Can I help you?" Trump asked, breaking the silence. Ethan studied him for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. Then, he finally spoke, his voice rough but steady. "I'm not looking for your help, sir. I'm just another guy trying to survive." Trump paused, feeling an unfamiliar discomfort. He was used to being the one in control, the one who had the power to change things. But here, in front of this man, it was different. There was something about Ethan that made Trump feel uncertain. "What's your name?" Trump asked, his voice softer now, a trace of genuine curiosity leaking through. "Ethan," the man replied simply. "Ethan Brooks. I used to serve. Back when I was someone." A chill ran down Trump's spine. The way Ethan said it, "used to serve," made Trump's heart skip. This wasn't just any homeless man. There was a story there, a story far beyond the scraps of life he now seemed to be living. Ethan's eyes flickered briefly, as though he had said too much. He turned his gaze back to the street, avoiding Trump's eyes. Trump hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do here? Was this just another random encounter, or was there something more to this moment? His eyes dropped to the man's army jacket, its insignia nearly faded, but still legible. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just any veteran. This man had served. Trump, for the first time in a long while, found himself at a loss for words. He had always been the one with the answers, the one who knew how to fix things, how to win. But here, in front of Ethan, he felt small. "Tell me your story, Ethan," Trump finally said, his voice steady but with an edge of sincerity he couldn't ignore. "What happened to you?" Ethan's gaze never wavered from the street. He didn't answer immediately, and for a long moment, it seemed as though Trump might be left standing there in awkward silence. But then, without warning, Ethan spoke. "I was a hero once," he muttered. "But heroes don't always get a happy ending." Trump felt his chest tighten. The words hung in the air, heavier than the weight of the city itself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's voice echoed as he wrapped up the moment. There was something about Ethan, something that told him this story was far from over. The man in front of him had lived a life Trump couldn't even begin to understand, and yet there was an undeniable connection, a pull between them that made Trump think. Maybe this encounter was more than just a passing moment. And for Ethan? Well, the man who had once been a hero had his own story to tell. Whether Trump would be a part of it, however, was a question that neither of them could answer just yet. As Trump stood there, his gaze lingering on Ethan, the bustling sounds of New York City seemed to fade into the background. It was as though the universe had momentarily stopped to give him the time to listen, to understand. Ethan wasn't just another homeless man sitting by the curb, asking for a few spare coins. He was someone who had once been a hero, someone who had fought for his country, only to be left behind by the very system that should have protected him. "Do you mind if I sit?" Trump asked, his voice unexpectedly softer than usual. He hadn't planned on staying long, but something inside told him that this wasn't just a simple encounter. Ethan's eyes met his, sizing him up before nodding slightly. "Go ahead, if you're looking for a story," Ethan said, his voice carrying a mixture of bitterness and resignation. Trump took a seat next to him, slightly uncomfortable in the uncharacteristic vulnerability of the moment. He wasn't used to just sitting and talking without some sort of agenda, but there was something about Ethan that disarmed him, made him forget about the tight schedules and packed rooms he was used to. "I didn't always end up here," Ethan began, his gaze now distant, as if his mind had wandered far back in time. Trump, always used to being the one in control of conversations, felt an odd sense of patience overcome him as he leaned in, eager to hear what Ethan would say next. "I was born in a small town in Texas," Ethan continued, his voice steady but filled with a sense of nostalgia. "My family didn't have much, but we had enough. My father was a mechanic, my mom worked as a schoolteacher. They taught me to respect hard work, to honor the people who served our country. I was proud of that, proud to be American." Trump listened carefully, nodding in acknowledgement. He had heard many similar stories before, stories of small-town America, of families that made sacrifices to build better lives. But Ethan's story wasn't one of upward mobility or simple struggles. It was a story that would change as quickly as a soldier's life does in the heat of battle. "When I turned 18, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I enlisted in the Army. I wanted to be someone, wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself. The war in Iraq was escalating, and I knew it was where I was needed. I didn't hesitate. I thought I'd be part of something important, something I could be proud of." Trump could see the young man he was describing, the ambitious teenager with dreams of making a difference. In his mind, Trump could almost picture Ethan in uniform, standing tall beside his comrades, ready to face whatever came his way. "But it didn't turn out like I thought," Ethan said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I wasn't ready for what war would do to me. The things I saw, the things I did, they changed me. They broke me." Trump's expression softened. He had heard these kinds of stories before, veterans who came back from war only to face a battle within themselves. But he had never truly understood the depth of the emotional wounds they carried. Now, hearing Ethan's words, he felt a surge of something unfamiliar: guilt. "I came back home," Ethan continued, "but I wasn't the same. I'd lost friends over there, seen things no one should ever see. I tried to fit back into civilian life, but it didn't work. The memories, the nightmares, they stayed with me. And I guess I thought if I kept pushing, if I kept pretending I was fine, I could push them away." Trump shifted uncomfortably, unable to fully grasp the depth of Ethan's pain. He had his own share of battles, political and personal, but this was something different. Ethan's story was a raw reminder of the costs of war, of what happened when soldiers came home but couldn't leave the battlefield behind. "Eventually, it all caught up with me," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "The stress, the pain. I drank. I lost my job. I lost my family. One thing led to another, and here I am, sitting on the streets, invisible to most. No one cares about the broken ones, the ones who gave everything and got nothing in return." Trump could see the weariness in Ethan's eyes, the tiredness of a man who had fought hard for something, only to be abandoned by the very system he had once sworn to defend. The anger in his words was palpable, and Trump couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. "I didn't ask for this," Ethan muttered, almost to himself, "but here I am." Trump sat silently, allowing the weight of Ethan's words to sink in. He had always been driven by success, by the need to win and build, but this was something entirely different. Ethan wasn't asking for charity. He wasn't asking for handouts. What he wanted was acknowledgement, understanding, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to rebuild his life. As the silence stretched between them, Trump found himself searching for the right words to say. He had made a career out of speeches, of rallying people to his side with the right words at the right moment. But here, sitting next to Ethan, there were no speeches, no rehearsed lines. There was only the harsh reality of a man who had lost everything, and the bitter truth that sometimes heroes weren't given the recognition they deserved. Trump cleared his throat, finally breaking the silence. Ethan, I don't know what I can do for you right now, but I do know this. People like you deserve better. You've given everything for this country, and it's not right that you're left out here like this. Ethan didn't look at him, but his lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. Talk is cheap, sir. But thank you. Trump's eyes narrowed as he looked at the man beside him. He knew that this encounter was not just some fleeting moment. Something inside him had shifted. Something deep. Something that urged him to do more than just give a passing acknowledgement. I'm going to look into this, Trump said, his voice firm, a quiet determination taking root. There's got to be a better way for men like you. Ethan finally met his gaze, a mixture of skepticism and hope in his eyes. We'll see. Trump stood up, a new resolve building within him. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. This man's story wasn't over. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to do something about it. As Trump walked away, the noise of the city rushed back into his ears, but this time, he couldn't shake the thought of Ethan's face. There was a story here. A story that needed to be told, and a man who needed to be heard. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's words echoed in his mind as he made his way down the crowded streets, the weight of the encounter following him every step of the way. Ethan had been right about one thing. Heroes didn't always get the ending they deserved. But Trump was starting to wonder if that was about to change. The next few days were a blur for Trump. His schedule was as packed as ever: business meetings, high-profile dinners, and public appearances. But something had shifted in him. The face of Ethan, that worn, haunted look, stayed with him, lingering at the back of his mind like an unfinished conversation. The noise of his life, the whirlwind of deals and decisions, had never seemed so insignificant. That night, as Trump sat in his office overlooking the city skyline, he found himself staring at the same question he had asked Ethan. What can I do for you? The answer hadn't been clear at the time. But now, as he looked at his reflection in the glass, the weight of his privilege, his power, felt heavier than it ever had before. He had resources. He had influence. And yet, it felt like he had done so little for people like Ethan. He couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words. Heroes don't always get a happy ending. It gnawed at him. A man who had served his country with honor, only to be discarded and forgotten. A hero, discarded like trash. Trump's chest tightened at the thought. He had seen the veterans on TV, heard the stories, but he had never felt them so personally. Not until now. Suddenly, he picked up the phone, dialing a number he hadn't thought about in years. Don? It's Trump, he said, his voice sharp but resolute. I need a favor. The next morning, Trump and Don gathered in his private meeting room. Don was an old friend, someone Trump had worked with for years, a businessman who had risen through the ranks in ways Trump respected. But more importantly, Don had connections in the government, connections in veteran affairs. Trump knew he was the man to help. Don, I need to get a few things moving fast, Trump said, looking straight into his friend's eyes. I met a guy, a war hero, down on his luck. He's homeless, living in the streets of New York. And he's not the only one. There's a whole generation of veterans who've been forgotten. I want to do something about it. Don raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. You're not just talking about charity, are you? You want to make a real impact? Trump nodded. I don't do things halfway, Don. I want to build a foundation, a way to get these guys back on their feet, get them the help they need. It's about restoring dignity. These men gave everything for this country. We can't just leave them out in the cold. Don leaned back in his chair, processing the weight of Trump's words. It's going to be a massive undertaking, Trump. We're talking about millions of dollars in funding, extensive outreach programs, partnerships with hospitals, government agencies. I know, Trump interrupted, his voice firm, but we can do it. I've built big things before. I can build this too. I'll take care of the funding, but I need you to help me pull the right strings. We need political support, and we need people in high places to stand behind us. Don nodded slowly. You're asking for a lot, but I see your point. This could be something big, something that resonates with people. Trump leaned forward, his voice more passionate now. It's bigger than just a political play. This is about righting a wrong. It's about giving these men what they deserve, even if it's too late for some of them. If we don't do something now, then who will? There was a long pause, and then Don spoke, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. You've always been a fighter, Trump. I'll make some calls. Let's see what we can get rolling. Trump extended his hand, shaking Don's with a sense of finality. Thank you. Let's make this happen. A week later, Trump found himself standing at the entrance to a large veterans rehabilitation center in upstate New York. He had been briefed on the facility, a place that was doing its best to support homeless veterans, but it was clear the system was overwhelmed. The funding was minimal, and the resources were stretched thin. Trump had wanted to see things firsthand, to get a clearer picture of the scope of the problem. As he walked through the facility's worn hallways, he couldn't ignore the contrast between the clean, polished image of his own empire and the worn-out walls of this place. The veterans here didn't have a lot. They had little more than the hope that someone, someday, would notice them. One of the staff members gave Trump a tour, showing him the areas where veterans stayed, the small clinic where they received medical treatment, and the limited educational programs they could access to rebuild their lives. This place is doing the best it can, the staff member explained. But we're underfunded. We don't have the staff to meet the demand, and the waiting lists are long. Too many men slip through the cracks. Trump could see it in their faces, the tired eyes, the worn hands, the defeated posture. These weren't just statistics. These were real people, men who had served their country and been left to fend for themselves. Some were dealing with PTSD, some with addiction, but all of them shared the same story. They had been forgotten. As they walked through the facility's yard, Trump stopped in front of a group of veterans gathered under a tree, talking quietly amongst themselves. They looked up when he approached, some with curiosity, others with skepticism. But as he stood there, Trump felt an odd mixture of responsibility and determination. These were the people he had to help. These were the men whose lives needed to change. One of the veterans, an older man with a graying beard, stood up and walked toward him. "You're the guy who wants to fix this, huh?" he asked, his voice gruff. Trump nodded. "That's right. I want to make sure you and others like you get what you deserve." The veteran studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "It's about time someone did something. It's been too long." Trump couldn't help but feel a surge of resolve. This wasn't just about fixing a problem. It was about making sure no one else had to suffer like this again. As he left the facility, Trump felt a fire burning inside him, stronger than ever. This was no longer just a personal mission. It was a cause, one that would resonate with millions. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. This was a fight worth winning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's voice rang in his mind, the words now carrying more weight than ever. It was time to make a difference. It was time to make Ethan's story and the stories of countless other forgotten veterans known to the world. In the days following his visit to the rehabilitation center, Trump couldn't shake the images from his mind. The veterans he had seen, their tired eyes and defeated expressions, haunted him. The fire that had sparked within him during the visit continued to burn brightly, urging him to take action. But he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He spent the next few weeks meeting with key people, donors, politicians, and veterans organizations. He made calls, sent emails, and laid the groundwork for what he knew would be a massive undertaking. The goal was clear: a nationwide initiative to support homeless veterans, one that would not only provide temporary shelter but offer long-term solutions, mental health care, job training, education, and reintegration into society. The more Trump thought about it, the more he realized how deeply personal this cause had become for him. He wasn't just trying to fix a problem for the sake of it. He had seen firsthand how deeply these men were suffering, and something inside him was pushing him to do whatever it took to make a difference. These veterans weren't just statistics to him anymore. They were faces, real people with stories and lives that had been torn apart. As he sat in his office late one evening, reviewing a list of potential donors, he received a call from Don. "Trump," Don's voice crackled through the phone. "I've got some good news. We've got a lot of backing. We've secured a solid group of major donors who are willing to contribute to the initiative. I've also lined up some meetings with a few key senators who are interested in supporting this. But I need you to be ready for the fight. It's not going to be easy, especially when you start pushing for more government support." Trump leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I've been fighting my whole life. This is no different. We're going to get this done, Don. Just wait and see." The first major fundraiser Trump held for the initiative was nothing short of extravagant. Held at one of his luxury hotels in Manhattan, the event drew a crowd of wealthy donors, celebrities, and political figures. Trump knew how to draw a crowd, and this event was no different. The ballroom was filled with eager faces, all ready to contribute to a cause they knew was important but hadn't quite fully grasped. Trump took the stage, his presence commanding attention as the room quieted. He could see the faces in the crowd, eager for a reason to support something worthwhile. This was his chance to make them care, not just about the cause, but about the people who had been forgotten for too long. "My friends," he began, his voice booming across the room, "we're here tonight for a very important reason. We are here to support the heroes who've been forgotten by the system they fought to protect. These men and women risked everything, and it's time we gave them something back. It's time we gave them the respect, the care, and the opportunities they deserve." The room was silent for a moment, but as Trump continued, his words resonated with the crowd. He spoke not just from his usual persona of a businessman and a leader, but as someone who had personally seen the need for action. He spoke with sincerity, a tone that carried weight because it was clear that this wasn't just a political maneuver. It was something far more personal. "I know what it takes to build something great. I've done it my whole life. But building something that will truly change lives, that's something worth fighting for. Tonight, we're not just raising money. We're starting a movement to ensure that no veteran is left behind, a movement to give them the future they've earned." The applause was deafening. It was clear that Trump's words had struck a chord. As the night progressed, millions of dollars in pledges were made, and by the time the event concluded, Trump was more convinced than ever that this initiative could change the course of so many lives. But even as the money flowed in and the support grew, Trump knew the real work had only just begun. He couldn't rely solely on donations and speeches to fix the systemic issues facing these veterans. The road ahead would require hard work, a shift in public perception, and most importantly, action. The next few months were a whirlwind. Trump's team worked tirelessly to set up the foundation, partnering with veteran organizations, healthcare providers, and job training centers. There were countless meetings with local governments, proposals, and plans drawn up for new facilities and outreach programs. Trump traveled the country, visiting other veterans' facilities, talking to more heroes like Ethan, and working to get the right people in place. Each visit reinforced the urgency of the mission. The lack of resources, the lack of a comprehensive national plan to help veterans, was staggering. It wasn't just about putting up more shelters. It was about changing lives, offering rehabilitation, and creating a sustainable system that allowed these men to find their place in the world again. One afternoon, Trump found himself in Washington, D.C., seated at a long table with several senators and representatives. The conversation was tense. The political landscape was never easy to navigate, especially when it came to initiatives that involved both public and private funding. Trump's plan would require major cooperation across party lines, and not everyone was on board. "I understand your passion, Mr. Trump," Senator Collins began, her tone skeptical. "But what you're proposing here, this initiative to fund mental health services, job training, and housing for homeless veterans, this is a massive undertaking. And we need to know that there's a clear plan for how we're going to make this work, especially when it comes to the budget." Trump sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Collins. "Senator, I don't need to tell you about the sacrifices these veterans have made. They gave everything to protect this country. What I'm asking for is simple. Let's give them a chance to rebuild. Let's give them the opportunity to succeed. I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is, but we need your support in making this happen." The room fell silent. Trump could feel the weight of the moment, the tension thick in the air. But he didn't flinch. He had made it this far, and he wasn't going to back down now. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Senator Collins spoke again. "You have our attention, Mr. Trump. Let's see what we can do to make this a reality." Trump smiled, a glint of victory in his eyes. It wasn't over yet, but he knew they were on the right path. He wasn't just fighting for a cause. He was fighting for the heroes who had given everything, and for the future of countless veterans like Ethan. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's voice echoed in his mind once more, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly making a difference. The road ahead would be tough, but he was ready for the fight. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Trump stood at the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered outside the new Veterans Rehabilitation Center. The project was months in the making, but today, it was all becoming real. Behind him, construction crews were already preparing the land. Diggers, bulldozers, and cranes moving in sync as they began the monumental task of bringing the vision to life. The press had gathered in full force, cameras rolling, eager to capture the moment. This wasn't just another business venture or a political stunt. This was something different, something deeply personal. Trump had arrived early, before the media frenzy, to take a quiet moment by himself. He stood there, looking out at the plot of land where the center would rise, his thoughts drifting to the veterans he had met. Ethan, of course, but also the countless others he had encountered on his journey. Each of their stories echoed in his mind, reminding him of why he had set all of this in motion. Do it for them, he thought, his mind focusing. Give them what they need. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked to the front of the stage. The crowd cheered as he approached, his usual charismatic presence commanding the attention of everyone in sight. "Thank you all for being here today," Trump began, his voice booming across the crowd. "This isn't just a groundbreaking ceremony. This is a moment that marks a turning point for the veterans who have been left behind for too long. This is the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where we give these men and women the help they need to heal, rebuild, and thrive." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We've built empires. We've built businesses. But nothing compares to the power of building a future for those who have given everything for our country. The veterans we honor today, these are the true heroes. And it's time they were given the opportunities they deserve." There was a brief silence before the crowd erupted into applause. Trump's words struck a chord. Even the reporters, who were often skeptical of his moves, seemed moved by the gravity of the moment. This wasn't about politics. It was about people, real people. The first phase of the center's construction would be focused on providing basic shelters and medical services for homeless veterans. But Trump's vision was bigger. He wanted this to be a comprehensive hub, one that offered not only a place to stay but also rehabilitation programs, educational opportunities, and access to job training. It would provide a way for veterans to reintegrate into society, to regain the dignity and self-worth that so many of them had lost. The center's location, in a quiet corner of upstate New York, was ideal. It was far enough from the chaos of the city to offer peace and healing, but close enough to urban centers to provide easy access to job opportunities and support services. As Trump toured the construction site, he felt a sense of pride swell inside him. This was his doing. It was his vision taking shape before his very eyes. But even as he stood there, surveying the progress, there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, one he couldn't shake. He had made promises. Promises to Ethan. Promises to the veterans who had shared their stories with him. But could he really deliver on them? Could one man really make a difference in the face of such overwhelming need? For a moment, Trump's confidence wavered. But as he glanced around at the workers, at the construction crews working tirelessly to turn this dream into reality, he felt a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about him. It was about all of them. It was about the veterans and about the families and communities that would benefit from a nation that took care of its heroes. Trump made a mental note to himself. There's no turning back now. We finish what we started, no matter what. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and endless planning. Trump worked with local and state officials, making sure the center would have the funding and support it needed. He pushed forward with a relentless drive, ensuring that everything was in place for the center to open its doors as soon as possible. He also made it a point to personally visit the site every week. Sometimes, he arrived unannounced, just to see the progress firsthand. Each time, he spoke to the workers, offering words of encouragement, even as they looked at him in surprise. "You're doing great work here," he would say, his voice firm but appreciative. "This is bigger than a building. This is changing lives." Meanwhile, the veterans' stories kept coming back to him. Trump couldn't forget the image of Ethan, sitting in that shabby chair outside the diner, his eyes tired but filled with a quiet strength. Ethan wasn't the only one. As Trump's team reached out to other veterans organizations, it became clear just how deep the problem was. Homelessness among veterans wasn't just a few isolated cases. It was an epidemic, and it was something that had been ignored for far too long. Trump was determined to be the one to bring it to light. He knew that the grand opening of the center would be a pivotal moment, a turning point in the fight to end veteran homelessness. But he also knew that one center wasn't enough. This had to be a nationwide movement, a push to ensure that no veteran ever had to suffer alone again. The media was beginning to take notice of Trump's efforts. The press conferences, the visits to veterans' homes, the ongoing work on the rehabilitation center. It was all starting to make waves. But even with the attention, Trump couldn't afford to lose focus. This project was personal, but it was also bigger than him. It was about making sure that the heroes who had given everything for their country weren't forgotten again. As the groundbreaking ceremony neared, Trump began to feel a new sense of purpose in his life. He had been many things: a businessman, a reality TV star, a former president. But now, more than ever, he felt like a man on a mission. A man with a clear goal: to restore the dignity of veterans who had given their lives for their country. When the ceremony finally came, it was nothing short of spectacular. The cameras flashed, the crowd cheered, and Trump stood there, a proud smile on his face. But as he looked out at the sea of people gathered to witness the moment, he knew that the real work was just beginning. This was just the start of a larger journey, one that would take years to complete. But for the first time, Trump felt ready for it. He wasn't just building a center. He was building a future where veterans like Ethan had a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity and hope. As he cut the ribbon, a quiet sense of satisfaction washed over him. This is only the beginning, he thought, and I'm just getting started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's words echoed in his mind once more, and he knew, in that moment, that he had found his true calling. The grand opening of the Veterans Rehabilitation Center had been a resounding success. The media coverage was positive, donors continued to pledge their support, and public interest was at an all-time high. But as Trump sat in his office late one evening, watching the news coverage, he couldn't help but feel that something was missing. There was a sense of accomplishment in the air, sure, but the real work, the one that would truly make an impact, had only just begun. He had spent the last few months ensuring that the center would offer more than just temporary shelter for veterans. It would provide real, long-term solutions. Yet, even with all the planning, he knew that the real test would come when the doors opened to the first residents. How would they respond? Would the services truly help them? Or would the system, as it so often did, fall short? Trump's thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Don. "Ethan is here. He wants to meet with you." The name hit Trump like a jolt of electricity. Ethan, the veteran whose face had become a symbol for the initiative he had started. The man who had given Trump a sense of purpose, reminding him of the importance of this cause. Trump's eyes narrowed with curiosity and determination. Ethan had been a quiet presence in the background, never asking for special treatment, always keeping his distance. Yet, Trump knew that behind that reserved demeanor was a man who carried a heavy burden, one that wasn't easy to shake off. He had come to represent not just the struggles of veterans, but also the very reason Trump was pushing so hard for this initiative. "I'll meet him," Trump said to himself, picking up the phone and dialing Don's number. The following afternoon, Trump met Ethan in the private meeting room at the center. The veteran sat quietly across from him, his eyes distant, but sharp. He had aged since the first time Trump had seen him. The lines on his face were deeper, the weight of his experiences pressing harder than ever. "Ethan, it's good to see you," Trump said, extending a hand. Ethan took it, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Trump, I appreciate you meeting with me." Trump nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "Please call me Donald. You've been through a lot, I can tell. I wanted to check in. How's everything going here? Are the services working for you?" Ethan's gaze faltered for a moment, then returned to Trump's. "It's not about the center, Donald. It's about what's happening inside my head. The trauma, the memories, they don't go away just because there's a roof over your head or a meal on your plate." Trump frowned, leaning forward in his chair. "I get it, Ethan, but you're here now, and we're going to give you the support you need. You don't have to face this alone. That's why we built this place, to give you the tools to rebuild your life." Ethan looked down at his hands, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "I've been rebuilding for years. But it's not just about having a place to sleep or food to eat. It's about what comes next. The real fight isn't the one you face on the battlefield. It's the one that comes after, the one in your head. And no one talks about that." Trump felt a pang in his chest. He had known about the issues veterans faced: PTSD, depression, the struggle to readjust to civilian life. But hearing it from someone like Ethan, someone who had lived it firsthand, made it hit harder. He realized that the center, despite its best efforts, couldn't solve every problem. There was more that needed to be done, something deeper. "We've got mental health programs here, Ethan," Trump said, trying to reassure him. "We're bringing in the best professionals to work with you. But if that's not enough, if you need more, I want you to let me know. We're going to fight this together." Ethan looked up slowly, his eyes filled with a mix of appreciation and skepticism. "It's not just about the programs, Donald. It's about the understanding. People can throw money at this problem, build nice centers, and hire the best doctors. But if they don't understand what it's like to be us, what it's like to lose everything, to feel like you don't belong anymore, then it's all just a distraction." Trump sat back, his mind racing. He had been so focused on the physical aspects, the buildings, the funding, the logistics, but Ethan was right. This wasn't just a logistical problem. It was an emotional one, a psychological one. These men and women had given everything for their country, only to return home to an unforgiving world that didn't understand their pain. And no amount of money could change that. "I hear you, Ethan," Trump said quietly. "I hear you loud and clear." There was a long silence between them before Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter now, but still full of conviction. "I'm not saying I don't appreciate the work you've done, but don't think this is a quick fix. We need people who are willing to listen, to understand, and to help us heal from the inside out." Trump nodded slowly, absorbing Ethan's words. "You're right. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have all the answers, but I'm committed to finding them. For you, and for every veteran who's out there struggling." Ethan finally cracked a small smile, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's all we can ask for, Donald. That's all we can ask for." As Ethan left the meeting, Trump sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of the conversation sink in. He had come to the Veterans Rehabilitation Center with the intention of solving a problem, but now he realized that solving the problem was far more complex than he had imagined. It wasn't enough to just provide shelter and food. It was about offering true understanding, support, and healing. Trump had always prided himself on his ability to tackle big problems head-on. But this was different. This wasn't something that could be solved with a grand gesture or a flashy press release. This required patience, empathy, and a willingness to listen, to understand what these men and women had been through and what they truly needed to heal. He made a decision in that moment. He wasn't just going to focus on the infrastructure of the center. He was going to start focusing on the people, on the veterans themselves, and on the issues they faced that no one had ever talked about. It was going to be a long journey, but Trump knew one thing for sure. This was a fight worth fighting. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's words echoed in his mind once more. This time, they felt more relevant than ever. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the rehabilitation center. Trump stood outside, looking over the vast property that was meant to provide sanctuary for veterans like Ethan. The sense of pride he had felt during the groundbreaking ceremony was still fresh, but as the days passed, the reality of the mission began to settle in. He had built the place, he had brought the professionals on board, and the veterans had started arriving. Yet, something still wasn't right. Ethan's words from their last meeting haunted him. The real fight isn't the one you face on the battlefield. It's the one that comes after. Trump rubbed his hands together, his mind turning over the complexities of the issue. He had seen the statistics. He knew about PTSD, about homelessness, about the struggles veterans faced reintegrating into society. But hearing it from someone like Ethan had shifted something deep inside him. This wasn't just about physical recovery or job training. It was about healing deep emotional wounds, wounds that ran far deeper than anyone realized. He needed to act, but he wasn't sure where to begin. Inside the center, the walls were filled with the quiet hum of activity. Veterans were going through the intake process, meeting with counselors, and starting assessments. But even here, in what was meant to be a place of refuge, there was a palpable tension in the air. Trump made his way through the building, stopping occasionally to speak with staff members or check in on the veterans. He paused outside a meeting room where a group of former soldiers were gathered for a therapy session. Through the glass, he saw the therapist speaking softly to a man whose face was hard to read. The veteran's hands shook slightly as he listened, a deep sadness in his eyes. It wasn't the first time Trump had witnessed such a scene, but today, it felt different, more personal. He knocked lightly before entering, and the room fell silent. The therapist, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Lisa Andrews, looked up and smiled warmly. "Mr. Trump," she said, "it's good to see you." Trump nodded. "I just wanted to check in, see how everything's going." One of the veterans, a tall man with a rough exterior and scars that told a story of battle, turned his gaze toward Trump. "It's tough, sir. It's tough to talk about this stuff." Trump studied him for a moment. "I get that. I know you've all been through a lot." Dr. Andrews spoke up. "That's the hardest part, Mr. Trump. Even though we've provided the services here, there's still a barrier that's hard to break through. Veterans aren't used to talking about what they've experienced. Many of them are used to carrying the weight on their own. They're not used to asking for help, and even when they do, it's difficult to open up about the things that haunt them." Trump's mind raced. He had been so focused on the physical and logistical aspects of the center that he had neglected the deeper, emotional challenges veterans faced. It was clear to him now that this wasn't just about providing a roof and resources. It was about giving these men and women a space to confront the invisible scars of war, a space to feel understood. "Do you think the programs are effective?" Trump asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. Dr. Andrews hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "Some are, but it's a long road. We have to take things slow, and that's not easy for veterans who are used to fast action, who are used to being on the move. Healing doesn't happen overnight." Trump's gaze shifted back to the veteran sitting silently in the corner. There was so much more going on behind his eyes than anyone could see. The world outside this room didn't understand his struggle, and maybe, just maybe, neither did Trump. At least not yet. After the session, Trump asked Dr. Andrews if she could join him for a walk around the center. As they strolled down one of the many hallways, Trump voiced his concerns. "I've built this place, but I don't know if it's enough," Trump admitted. "I'm doing what I can to get the funding, to bring in the best staff, but I still feel like we're missing something." "Ethan," he said something to me that made me think twice about all this. He said that no matter how many programs we offer, it's the understanding that's missing. Dr. Andrews looked at him, nodding thoughtfully. "He's right. We can have all the services in the world, but unless these veterans feel seen, heard, and understood, it won't matter. There's a fundamental disconnect." Many veterans, especially those struggling with PTSD or trauma, feel like they're invisible to the rest of society. The hardest part of their recovery is feeling like they're not alone, that someone truly understands what they've been through. Trump took a deep breath, his mind buzzing with the weight of her words. So, how do we change that? How do we make sure they feel heard? Well, Dr. Andrews said, we need more than just trained professionals. We need peer support. Veterans helping veterans. These men and women trust each other in ways they'll never trust outsiders. A fellow soldier understands the battlefield, the fear, the trauma in a way that no therapist or doctor can. If we can build a community of veterans who are willing to share their stories and support each other, that's where real healing starts. Trump stopped in his tracks, his mind racing with possibilities. A community of veterans. I can do that. I'll bring them together. I'll make sure they have a place to connect, a place to heal together. Dr. Andrews smiled. That's the key, Mr. Trump. It's about building a network. One that isn't just about support services, but about human connection. About showing these veterans that they aren't alone, and that they don't have to carry the burden by themselves anymore. That night, Trump couldn't sleep. His mind was full of ideas, plans, and strategies. The center wasn't just a place for recovery. It needed to be a sanctuary, a community where veterans could rebuild themselves not only through programs but through genuine bonds. He began to formulate a new initiative in his mind, one that would connect veterans across the country, not just in this center, but everywhere. A national network of veterans who would share their stories, support each other, and create a sense of belonging that had been stripped away by the horrors of war. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but Trump was no stranger to challenges. He had faced difficult battles before, and now, he was ready to fight the real fight for these men and women. The fight to help them heal, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The next morning, Trump met with his team to discuss the new initiative. He outlined his vision, a peer-to-peer support network powered by veterans themselves. It would be a community built on trust and shared experiences where veterans could find the support they needed to recover. Trump's vision was bold, but he was used to big dreams. As he spoke to his team, he could feel the energy shift. This was going to be something different. It wasn't just a building, and it wasn't just another program. This was going to be a movement that could change the way the country viewed its veterans and the way veterans viewed themselves. As the days passed, Trump's resolve grew stronger. He wasn't just building a center. He was building a future where veterans no longer had to face their battles alone. The weeks that followed were filled with a whirlwind of planning and outreach. Trump had set his sights on creating something far larger than just a rehabilitation center. He wanted to create a nationwide movement, a powerful community where veterans could come together, share their stories, and heal not just through professional help, but through each other. It wasn't going to be easy, but Trump had never backed down from a challenge. He sat in his office one morning, flipping through a stack of proposals. His team had worked tirelessly on the logistics of his new initiative, a nationwide network for veterans, one that would link veterans from all corners of the country in an effort to foster connection and support. It was ambitious, perhaps even audacious, but Trump had always believed in thinking big. He wasn't just aiming for a small project. He was looking to change the narrative, to give veterans the tools they needed to truly rebuild their lives. Don, his ever-reliable right-hand man, walked into the office with a cup of coffee in hand, snapping Trump back into focus. "We've got a meeting with some key partners later today," Don said, setting the cup down on the desk. "The logistics for the peer-to-peer network are coming together. But I think you might need to rethink how you're presenting this to the public." Trump raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "You've got the foundation, the structure," Don explained. "But this initiative won't just work if it's about fixing veterans. We need to frame it in a way that shows they're not broken. They're not just victims of war. They're warriors who fought for this country, and now they're coming together to help each other. It's about empowerment, not just recovery." Trump leaned back in his chair, mulling over Don's words. He'd always known the veterans' contributions to the country were immeasurable, but framing the initiative as an empowering network of support could indeed change how the public perceived the program. Instead of seeing veterans as people in need of rescue, he wanted them to be seen as resilient survivors, men and women who had overcome unimaginable odds and were now banding together to heal. "I like that," Trump said, a grin tugging at his lips. "Let's make it about strength, about rebuilding, about unity. We won't just give them a place to recover. We'll give them the tools to thrive again." The next few days were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and media preparation. Trump wanted the new initiative to hit the ground running, and he knew that the right media coverage was key to generating public interest and support. With Don's advice, they began crafting a new narrative, one where veterans weren't just recipients of aid, but active participants in a larger mission to restore their lives and the lives of those who would come after them. At the heart of the initiative was the idea of mentorship. Veterans who had struggled with PTSD, addiction, or homelessness would become mentors for those just beginning their journey. They would offer not just practical advice, but a deep understanding of the emotional battles each veteran faced. It was about creating a community where no one felt alone, where every person could find someone who truly understood them. Trump and his team launched a nationwide campaign to promote the new initiative, using social media, television interviews, and public speaking events to get the word out. They emphasized the idea that veterans weren't broken. They were survivors, warriors who had faced unimaginable challenges and had come home stronger than ever. Ethan, who had become a close friend to Trump and a symbol of the new initiative, agreed to participate in the campaign. His face, once hardened and withdrawn, now radiated the strength and determination that Trump admired so much. In interviews, Ethan spoke candidly about his struggles, but also about the healing power of connection. He encouraged other veterans to reach out, to lean on one another, and to start seeing their experiences as a source of strength rather than something to hide from. "Together, we can heal," Ethan said in one of the videos. "We're not victims. We're warriors." Trump was amazed by how Ethan had transformed before his eyes. The man who had walked into the center all those months ago, guarded and unsure, was now speaking with a sense of purpose and pride. It was the beginning of something truly incredible. As the campaign took off, the impact was immediate. Veterans from across the country reached out to share their stories. Some were hesitant at first, unsure of what they would find in this new initiative. But as the network grew, so did their confidence. Veterans began connecting with one another, sharing their challenges and their victories. They formed mentorship groups, online forums, and support networks, each one focused on helping others heal in a way that felt real and personal. Trump watched as the first waves of veterans began to embrace the movement. He saw them sharing stories of recovery, of getting sober, of finding jobs, of reconnecting with their families. The initiative was more than just a lifeline. It was a lifeblood, a testament to the resilience and strength of the human spirit. But it wasn't just the veterans who were impacted. The public began to shift their view of those who had served in the military. They saw veterans not as people who were broken or lost, but as men and women who had given everything for their country, and who, with the right support, could overcome any obstacle. The narrative was changing, and Trump could feel it in the air. The veterans were no longer invisible. They had become a powerful force for change, a force that would help shape the future of this country. And Trump, for the first time in a long while, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than a campaign. It was a movement, one that would redefine what it meant to be a veteran in America. One evening, as Trump sat alone in his office, reflecting on the success of the initiative, he received a call. It was Ethan. "Donald," Ethan's voice crackled through the phone. "I wanted to thank you. This program, it's helping more than I ever thought possible. It's not just me, it's everyone I'm talking to. We're seeing a change." Trump smiled. "You did it, Ethan. You're the one leading the charge." Ethan laughed softly. "We're all in this together. But you've made it happen. I'll never forget what you've done for us." Trump paused, feeling a lump in his throat. He had always prided himself on making things happen, on bringing people together to achieve the impossible. But this was different. This was about healing. It was about creating something that could truly change lives, and he had helped make it a reality. "Thank you," Trump said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "We're just getting started." The success of the Veterans Initiative was just the beginning. As the months passed, the movement grew, and Trump found himself more involved than ever. He visited veterans across the country, hearing their stories, learning from them, and continuing to push for more change. The work was far from over, but the momentum was undeniable. As the movement gained strength, Trump's message became clearer than ever. Together, we rise. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's voice echoed once again, a powerful call to action for anyone who had ever faced an uphill battle and fought to come out stronger. This was more than a story of a man in power. It was the story of a movement built on strength, unity, and the unbreakable bond between warriors. And for Trump, it was the greatest accomplishment of his life. The ripple effect of Trump's initiative was undeniable. What began as a single conversation, a chance encounter between two unlikely allies, had blossomed into a nationwide movement, a force that transcended politics, backgrounds, and even the hardships of war. Veterans were finally getting the support they deserved, and the public was taking notice. But as the program grew, so did the challenges. Trump sat at his desk one late evening, his eyes focused on the growing pile of letters, messages, and requests for help. The Veterans Network had become so expansive that it was starting to overwhelm the infrastructure. But that wasn't the real problem. The real challenge lay in ensuring that the support being offered was sustainable, meaningful, and accessible to every veteran who needed it. Don said as he walked into the office, "I've been going over the data from the past few months, and the response has been incredible. We've seen thousands of veterans join the network, and the mentorship programs are booming. But there's a catch. We need more funding to keep up with the demand." Trump leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing. He had anticipated this. The initiative was growing faster than even he had expected. "How much more are we talking about?" "Several million," Don replied. "We need to scale the operations, hire more staff, create more community spaces, and expand the outreach. The veterans are coming in waves, and if we want to maintain this momentum, we need a lot more resources." Trump nodded, the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. He had made a promise to the veterans, and he intended to keep it. But there was always a price to pay for change. He wasn't unfamiliar with the art of fundraising, but this was different. This wasn't about a business venture. It was about making sure that veterans' lives were truly transformed. That meant making sure the initiative wasn't just a flash in the pan, but something that would endure long into the future. The next day, Trump met with a group of influential donors. These were individuals who had supported his past endeavors, but today, he needed them for a different reason. He had a vision of a country united by the stories of its veterans, with a robust infrastructure that could support them long after they left the battlefield. As he spoke, he wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for faith in a cause that transcended the typical boundaries of charity. "We are not just funding a program," he told them, his voice full of conviction. "We are investing in the future of our country. These veterans are warriors. They've given everything for us. Now, it's our turn to give back, not out of pity, but out of respect for their service." This initiative isn't just a safety net. It's the foundation for a new era of unity and strength. Trump's words struck a chord with the donors. By the end of the meeting, he had secured the necessary funds, ensuring that the Veterans Network would continue to grow and evolve. The momentum of the initiative reached new heights as it gained further traction across the nation. Trump's commitment to building a lasting infrastructure of support for veterans began to take shape in powerful ways. The mentor-mentee relationships were flourishing. Stories of veterans overcoming their personal battles, be it PTSD, homelessness, or addiction, were becoming more than just success stories. They were testimonies of resilience and hope. Trump had always believed in the power of people coming together, but now he was witnessing it firsthand. In every corner of the country, veterans were no longer isolated. They were finding their voices, sharing their struggles, and offering hope to others who were still in the trenches, battling their own demons. One afternoon, Trump received an unexpected visit from a veteran named Sarah, a woman who had served in combat and was now an outspoken advocate for the program. She had reached out to Trump's office to request a meeting, and when she arrived, her presence was commanding. "Mr. Trump," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of experience, "I'm here to tell you that this program is changing lives. I've seen it. I've lived it, and I'm ready to do everything I can to help take it to the next level. Trump stood up to greet her, impressed by the determination in her voice. Tell me what you've seen, he said, motioning for her to sit down. Sarah began to speak, recounting her own struggles with reintegration after her service. When I first came back, I didn't know who I was anymore. I was broken, isolated, and angry. I didn't want help from anyone, but I knew something had to change. I found the network through a fellow veteran, and at first, I didn't think it would make a difference. But slowly, I started to open up. I started to feel heard. She paused, her gaze intense. I'm here because I want to take the next step. I want to help other women veterans who are facing the same struggles I did. The system is built for men, but the female experience is different. We need to address the unique challenges that women face when they return home. Trump leaned forward, listening intently. Sarah's passion was palpable, and he recognized the importance of what she was saying. What can we do to make that happen? He asked. I've been talking to other female veterans, and we need a specialized program for us, Sarah explained. We need spaces where we can connect, share our stories, and heal in our own way. We need to make sure that women veterans have the support they deserve. Trump nodded, taking her words to heart. We'll make it happen, he promised. You're right. This program has to address the needs of every veteran, no matter who they are. You have my word. This will be a priority. As the initiative continued to evolve, Trump's focus shifted toward inclusivity, ensuring that every veteran, no matter their gender, background, or experience, had access to the support they needed. Sarah's input led to the development of specialized programs that addressed the unique struggles of female veterans, from navigating reintegration to managing the trauma of combat. The success of these efforts was immediate. Women veterans began to feel a renewed sense of belonging. They were no longer invisible in a male-dominated narrative. They were being seen, heard, and supported. One evening, as Trump looked out over the rehabilitation center, watching the veterans engage in a group discussion, he reflected on just how far the program had come. It was more than a program now. It was a movement of healing, strength, and unity. The veterans weren't just recovering. They were thriving, coming together to help each other rebuild their lives, one story at a time. And as Trump watched, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They had come so far, but this was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump's words rang out once again, a reminder that the road ahead might be long, but it was one they would all walk together as a united force. The veterans had found their purpose again, and so had Trump. Months passed, and Trump's initiative had become a formidable movement. What started as a personal mission had evolved into something that was changing the lives of countless veterans across the country. But the work was far from over. The challenge was no longer just about giving veterans a platform. It was about ensuring that the momentum would last and that the next generation of warriors would never be left behind. Despite the success, there were still whispers of doubt. Some questioned whether the initiative would be able to sustain itself, whether the public would continue to care, or whether the political landscape would shift and divert focus elsewhere. But Trump had seen enough battles to know that change was never easy. He wasn't someone to shy away from the storm. In fact, he thrived in it. One evening, Trump sat with Don in his office, the room quiet except for the occasional rustle of papers. A large map of the United States was spread across the table, dotted with markers indicating the locations of veteran centers, outreach programs, and peer-to-peer mentorship hubs. How are we looking? Trump asked, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. Don studied the map, then glanced up. We're in over 30 states now, and the programs are expanding faster than we expected. But there's a catch. We've hit a logistical bottleneck. The network is growing, but the infrastructure isn't keeping up. We're stretched thin. Trump frowned, understanding the severity of the situation. We need to do better. We can't let this fall apart now. Not when we're this close. The next few days were filled with planning sessions and brainstorming meetings. Trump knew that the key to sustaining the initiative was securing partnerships with both government agencies and private corporations. He needed more resources, more people, more funding, more infrastructure. It wasn't just about money, though. Trump knew that to make the program truly sustainable, he needed to create a system that could function on its own, without relying entirely on donations or public funding. He wanted to build a legacy, a robust network that would continue to support veterans for years to come. One afternoon, Trump made a bold decision. He called in a group of political allies and business leaders, people he had worked with over the years. These were individuals who had seen the potential in him long before this initiative began, and Trump knew they could help take the movement to the next level. He stood before them in a conference room, confident but humble. "I've spent my life building businesses, but this isn't about business. This is about people. This is about giving back to those who've given so much. It's time to take what we've created and turn it into something bigger, something that doesn't rely on one person's vision, but on the collective will of this country." Trump paused, his eyes scanning the room. "We need your help. We need you to join us, not just in supporting this program, but in believing that every veteran has the potential to rebuild their life. We're not just offering assistance. We're offering a chance for veterans to reclaim their future, to become leaders in their own right." The room was silent for a moment before one of the business leaders, an influential philanthropist named Richard, stood up. "We're in," he said, his voice firm, "but we need to expand the vision. This can't be just about veterans in crisis. It needs to be about creating a new model for reintegration, one that can be replicated across the world." Trump smiled, relieved that the room had embraced the challenge. "Exactly. We need to think bigger." With new support in place, Trump set his sights on expanding the initiative globally. His next step was to ensure that the veterans movement not only thrived in the U.S. but could serve as a model for other countries struggling with similar issues. The groundwork was laid to collaborate with international organizations, sharing knowledge and resources to help veterans worldwide. The transition wasn't easy. Some countries had their own systems for supporting veterans, and not all were open to adopting a foreign model. But Trump's persistence, along with the goodwill that had been generated by the success of the American program, eventually won them over. Through diplomacy and strategic partnerships, Trump and his team expanded the initiative's reach beyond the U.S. borders. As the initiative grew, so did its influence. Trump began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events around the world, where he advocated for global veteran support and solidarity. His message was clear. No matter where they came from, veterans were the backbone of society. They deserved more than just recognition. They deserved a future filled with hope and opportunity. Ethan, who had become a symbol of the program's success, accompanied Trump to some of these international events. In one particularly emotional speech at a conference in London, Ethan stood before a crowd of veterans from several countries and shared his personal story. "I've been where you are," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been lost. I've felt the darkness. But I found my way back, not alone, but with the help of my fellow veterans. We've all fought different battles, but we've all got one thing in common. We're survivors. And together, we can build something better, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us." The crowd was moved. Ethan's words echoed far beyond the room, sparking a global conversation about the need for comprehensive veteran care and support systems. Back home in the U.S., Trump was busy overseeing the construction of a new national center, a hub where veterans from across the country could come for rehabilitation, education, and support. The center would be a physical representation of the movement's values, strength, unity, and resilience. It would serve as the heart of the program, a place where veterans could receive holistic care and training, not only for their mental and emotional well-being, but for their future careers as well. On the day of the groundbreaking ceremony, Trump stood at the podium, surrounded by veterans who had become friends, allies, and collaborators in his mission. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and as he looked out over the crowd, Trump felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "This," he said, his voice resonating through the speakers, "is more than just a building. It's a symbol of what happens when people come together. It's a symbol of hope, of a future where veterans no longer struggle in silence, but stand together as a community, ready to face whatever comes next." As the first shovelful of dirt was turned over, the crowd erupted into applause. It was a moment of triumph, a turning point that marked not just the expansion of the initiative, but the beginning of a new era for veterans everywhere. But Trump knew that this was just the start. The true work was just beginning. The fight to change the narrative, to ensure that every veteran had a future, was ongoing. And as long as there was work to do, he would be there, leading the charge. The veterans were no longer just a forgotten part of society. They had become the leaders, the advocates, and the warriors of tomorrow. And Trump? He had found his true calling, fighting for them and ensuring they never stood alone again. As the Veterans Initiative continued to expand, Trump was thrust into the spotlight, not just as a former president, but as the leader of a movement that was transforming lives across the nation and even around the world. However, with the growing success came new pressures. Every step forward seemed to attract more scrutiny, more criticism, and more expectations. The media, once skeptical about Trump's commitment to the veterans' cause, now focused on every word he said, every decision he made. His initiative was hailed as groundbreaking, but it also made him a target for those who disagreed with his approach or his leadership. Critics on both the left and the right began to raise concerns. Was this really about helping veterans, or was it a way for Trump to maintain relevance? Was the movement truly sustainable, or was it just a grand spectacle? The questions didn't just come from the media. They came from within his own team. The pressure to ensure the initiative's long-term success was taking its toll. Trump's once clear vision was becoming clouded by the weight of managing such a vast and complex network. One evening, as he sat in his office, Don walked in with a folder in hand. His face was serious, his eyes betraying the weight of the news he was about to deliver. Trump motioned for him to sit. "What is it, Don?" Trump asked, his tone less impatient than usual, but the stress of the day had clearly gotten to him. "We've got problems," Don said bluntly. "We're getting too big too fast. The foundation is strong, but there's a growing divide among the team. Some are questioning your direction, the way you're handling things." Trump didn't react right away. He simply stared out the window, taking in the city lights below. The evening air seemed to hold a quiet tension, as if the world outside was aware of the battles he was facing within. "What kind of divide?" Trump asked, after a long pause. "There's a faction of people who believe the focus is shifting away from veterans and becoming more about public image," Don said carefully. "They think we're losing sight of the mission, that we're becoming just another political platform. Some of them are even suggesting we need to rethink the structure. More professional oversight, more collaboration with government agencies." Trump sat back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. He had always known that running a movement of this scale wouldn't be easy, but he didn't expect the internal conflict to be this intense. "So, they're saying we should let the government take more control?" he asked, his voice steady. "They're suggesting that we need to work more closely with the political establishment to secure long-term support. Some are even calling for restructuring the whole program to make it more in line with traditional models of charity," Don replied. Trump shook his head slowly. "I didn't start this to become just another bureaucratic mess. I started this to give these men and women what they've never had, a true chance at rebuilding their lives on their own terms." Trump knew that he was walking a fine line. If he didn't navigate the tensions within the initiative carefully, he risked losing the heart of what he had built. He didn't just want to be a politician, he wanted to be a leader. And leadership, he knew, came with sacrifices. That night, Trump decided to meet with the core team that had helped him launch the initiative. He needed to hear directly from them, to understand the heart of the issue and make sure he was still on the right path. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only way forward. The next morning, a group of trusted advisors, including Don, met in Trump's office. The room was charged with a tense energy as they gathered around the large conference table. Trump took his seat at the head of the table and looked around at the people who had been with him from the beginning. "I want to hear it all," Trump began, his voice calm but resolute. "What's really going on here? Where are we falling short?" A veteran of the team, Mark, spoke up first. "There are concerns that the initiative is becoming more about the headlines than the mission. There's too much focus on the optics, on what's being said in the media, and it's starting to affect morale. We're losing sight of the fact that we're here to support the veterans, not to make a splash in the press." Another team member, Sarah, who had become a vocal advocate for female veterans, added, "The veterans we're helping, especially the ones who've been struggling the longest, they don't care about the headlines. They care about whether or not we're truly there for them when they need it. They don't want to be treated like another political cause. They want real, tangible support. And right now, we might be losing that focus. Trump listened intently, his mind racing as he absorbed their words. It wasn't the first time he had heard concerns like this, but hearing it from his inner circle made it hit home. The veterans were his priority, and if his leadership was in question, it was up to him to make things right. "I hear you," Trump said finally, his tone steady. "And I won't let this initiative become a sideshow. But here's the deal. I didn't start this to play it safe. We're here to make a real impact, even if that means making people uncomfortable. We're shaking up the system, and not everyone's going to like it. But I'm not going to back down from that. I won't let the critics dictate what we do." The room was silent for a moment. Everyone knew the stakes were high. Trump's leadership was being tested in ways he hadn't anticipated, but this wasn't the time to back down. "I will make a public statement," Trump continued, his voice firm. "I'll remind everyone what we're really doing here. We're giving veterans a chance to rebuild, not just throwing money at a problem. We'll reinforce our mission and tighten the focus on veterans, on their healing, on their futures. I'm going to be out there, meeting with them, listening to their stories. It's time to remind the world that this initiative is about the people, not the politics." The next few days were a whirlwind. Trump issued a statement, clarifying his commitment to the cause. He held a press conference where he addressed the criticisms head-on, reaffirming the initiative's core mission. He reminded the public that the program was not about making headlines or gaining political points. It was about the men and women who had served their country and who deserved better than the system had given them. But he didn't stop there. Trump also made sure to personally visit several veteran centers, sitting down with the men and women whose lives had been impacted by the program. He listened to their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. And he made it clear, both in the media and in private, that this was not just a political agenda. It was a movement rooted in respect, empathy, and a desire to make a real difference. As Trump worked to steer the initiative back on course, he reflected on the challenges of leadership. Every decision seemed to come with a cost. But he knew that if he could stay true to the mission, stay focused on what really mattered, the initiative would continue to thrive. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Trump was resolute. He had promised the veterans that he would be there for them, and he wasn't about to back down. The real battle, he knew, had only just begun. As the initiative began to regain its focus, Trump found himself on the receiving end of an unexpected offer. The pressures of leadership, the internal conflicts, and the media scrutiny had all been taking their toll. But just as things seemed to be settling down, a surprise phone call disrupted his routine. It was from an unlikely source, former President Barack Obama. Trump had never been shy about expressing his political differences with Obama during his time in office. The two had often clashed in public, but what few people knew was that, despite their differences, they had developed a quiet mutual respect for each other. Now, it seemed that respect was about to be put to the test in a way Trump hadn't anticipated. "Donald," Obama's voice came through the phone, calm and composed. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I'm calling because I think you're doing something really important for the veterans, and I want to help." Trump sat up straight, a little taken aback. He wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation, but he certainly hadn't imagined that Obama, his political rival, would offer support. "I'm listening," Trump replied, his tone cautious but curious. Obama continued, his voice steady. "I've been following your work with the veterans, and while I have my concerns about how the program is structured, I think there's real potential here. I believe we can work together to make sure it's sustainable and, more importantly, that it stays focused on what matters most: the veterans themselves." Trump was silent for a moment, processing the offer. The idea of collaborating with Obama, someone he had spent years competing with, seemed surreal. But this was bigger than politics. The veterans movement had taken on a life of its own, and Trump knew that if it was going to continue to grow, it needed more than just his vision. It needed unity, and it needed the kind of expertise Obama could bring. "What exactly are you proposing?" Trump finally asked, trying to gauge Obama's intentions. "I've got connections, networks, and experience with large-scale programs," Obama explained. "I've seen what works and what doesn't. If we could find a way to bring together both our teams, Combine your leadership and my expertise in policy. I think we could take this initiative to a level that neither of us could reach on our own." Trump leaned back in his chair, the weight of the conversation settling in. He'd always prided himself on his independence, but the prospect of having Obama's backing was hard to ignore. This was an opportunity to bridge the political divide and create something truly powerful for the veterans. After a few moments of consideration, Trump spoke. "All right, let's make it happen. I think we can do something great together, but I'll be in charge. This is my vision, and I won't let anyone take that away." Obama chuckled. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Donald. I'll help guide the process, but you're the one who's built this. Just know, I'm here to lend a hand, not to take the reins." Trump nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. The media would have a field day with this partnership, but Trump was used to the spotlight. If this was going to work, it had to be on his terms. But with Obama's influence, the initiative could expand in ways he had never imagined. Over the next few weeks, Trump and Obama met privately several times. They discussed logistics, strategies, and ways to unify their teams. Despite their differences, they found common ground in their shared goal of improving the lives of veterans. Obama brought fresh ideas to the table, particularly around policy frameworks and how to navigate the complicated world of government funding and regulation. Trump, in turn, kept the focus on maintaining the movement's grassroots energy and ensuring that the veterans' voices remained central. Don, who had been skeptical of the partnership at first, began to see its potential. "This could really work," he said one afternoon, as he and Trump reviewed the latest updates. "Obama's connections could open doors that we've been struggling to get through. But you've got to keep the momentum going. If we start sounding too much like a traditional program, we'll lose what's special about this." "I know," Trump replied. "We won't let that happen. I'm not here to create another government-run program. This is still about the people, about giving them the resources they need to rebuild their lives, on their terms." As the months passed, Trump and Obama began to take their partnership public. They held joint press conferences, where Trump would talk about the need for action and Obama would provide the policy insights to back it up. The media, initially skeptical, began to praise the collaboration, calling it a rare moment of bipartisanship in a deeply divided political climate. But it wasn't just the media that took notice. Veterans across the country saw something new, a shift in how their struggles were being viewed. For the first time in a long time, they were not just a political issue or a forgotten statistic. They were the focal point of an initiative that had the potential to change the entire system. At one of their joint appearances, Obama gave a speech that resonated deeply with Trump. "This initiative is not about politics," Obama said, his voice firm. "It's about people. It's about those who have served this country, who have sacrificed so much, and who deserve the opportunity to rebuild their lives. Our veterans need more than just our thanks. They need our support, our attention, and our commitment." Trump watched from the sidelines, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Obama's words echoed what he had always believed, but hearing them from the former president made him feel like the movement was truly gaining momentum. After the speech, Trump walked over to Obama. "You were right about one thing," Trump said with a grin. "This isn't just about us. It's about them." Obama nodded. "That's why we're doing it, Donald. And that's why it'll work." The partnership between Trump and Obama became a model for bipartisanship, and the Veterans Initiative flourished under their combined leadership. The infrastructure grew stronger, more veterans were reached, and the program expanded its offerings to include education, job placement, mental health support, and housing. It was a system that worked, one that respected the individuality of each veteran while providing the resources they needed to succeed. As the movement continued to grow, Trump reflected on the path that had brought him here. He had never expected to be working alongside Obama, but in the end, it had been the right decision. The two men had their differences, but their shared belief in the importance of veterans had become the foundation for an unprecedented collaboration. Together, they had created something that would last long after they were gone. As Trump watched the initiative continue to grow, he knew that they were just getting started. The work was far from over, but with an unexpected ally by his side, the future for America's veterans had never looked brighter. As the partnership between Trump and Obama solidified, and their initiative for veterans gained widespread acclaim, the challenges didn't stop. In fact, The stakes only seemed to rise. The public was watching closely, waiting for any signs of weakness or misstep, ready to turn on them at the slightest indication that the cause wasn't living up to its promises. The initiative was now a major player in national conversations, and even international leaders began to take notice. Countries dealing with similar issues for their veterans reached out, looking for advice and guidance. But despite all the success, there was an underlying tension that Trump could feel growing within himself. The partnership with Obama, while productive, was not without its moments of discomfort. Trump had spent his life building his brand around his persona, strong-willed, unwavering, and fiercely independent. But now, with Obama's expertise constantly influencing the direction of the Veterans Initiative, he was forced to confront a reality that he hadn't fully considered. Could he really share the spotlight? Could he allow someone else to help shape his legacy, even if they were on the same team? It was one evening, after a grueling series of meetings with various veteran support groups, that Trump found himself in his office, contemplating everything that had led him here. His desk, once cluttered with legal documents, now held files about veterans programs, policy proposals, and meeting notes. The phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. "Mr. Trump, there's someone here to see you," his assistant, Karen, said. It's General Matthews. He's asking if you can meet him tonight." Trump paused. General Matthews was a prominent figure in the military community, an outspoken advocate for veterans' rights. Trump respected the general immensely, but he hadn't expected to see him this late at night. "Send him in," Trump said, his voice tinged with curiosity. General Matthews walked into the room with his usual commanding presence, his military bearings still evident even in civilian clothes. His face was stern, but there was something different in his eyes, a sense of urgency, maybe even concern. "General, it's late," Trump said, gesturing for him to sit. "What's on your mind?" Matthews didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Donald, I need to talk to you about something important. This initiative, it's doing great things for veterans, no doubt about that. But I've been hearing rumors that some of your closest allies, including Obama's team, are starting to push for a bigger political agenda." Trump raised an eyebrow, a small flicker of surprise crossing his face. "What do you mean?" "This isn't about politics. It's about helping veterans. That's been the mission from the start." "I believe that," Matthews said, leaning forward. "But there's a lot of chatter, Donald. People are starting to wonder if the message is getting diluted. Some of your team is saying that the initiative's expansion into policymaking and even media-driven campaigns is beginning to take on a life of its own. It's becoming about your legacy, about Obama's legacy." Trump's jaw tightened, and he sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping the edge of the desk. Matthews wasn't wrong. The media had latched onto the story of the collaboration between Trump and Obama, often framing it as a larger political maneuver rather than the veterans first cause it had been intended to be. "I've heard the same thing," Trump admitted, his voice quiet. "I've been wondering if it's starting to slip away from the core mission." Matthews studied him carefully. "You've always been a man of action, Donald. But this is different. The veterans, they're the ones who need you to stay focused. This isn't about public speeches or political points. It's about making real, tangible changes in their lives." Trump nodded, but the weight of Matthews' words hung heavy in the air. He had known for some time that the initiative's momentum was at risk of veering off course, but hearing it from someone like Matthews made the problem feel much more immediate. The next few days were a blur. Trump immersed himself in the program, visiting veteran facilities, meeting with more veterans than he ever had before. He spoke directly with them, bypassing the teams that had been instrumental in running the initiative. He heard their frustrations, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't about politics or even about Obama's legacy. It was about them, their struggles, their stories. One afternoon, after meeting with a group of veterans in a community center in Philadelphia, Trump sat down in a small office, exhausted but resolute. Don joined him, and Trump could see the concern on his face. "Are you okay?" Don asked, his voice low. Trump sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "I'm fine. I've just been thinking, I need to get back to what this is really about. I've been too focused on all the noise. This isn't about me. This is about them." That evening, Trump made a decision. He needed to take control once again. not in a way that would alienate Obama or the team, but in a way that would bring the focus back to where it truly belonged. The veterans. He called a meeting with his closest advisors, including Obama's team, to lay out a new plan. It was a bold move, one that would recalibrate the direction of the initiative without undermining what had already been accomplished. "We're going to simplify things," Trump said, his voice firm. "The veterans will remain the heart of this program. We're going to focus more on direct services, on rebuilding their lives through job programs, housing, and healthcare. No more distractions. We'll work with Obama's team to shape the policy side, but the real work is going to be done on the ground. I'll be out there with them, talking to them, hearing their stories. We're going back to the basics." The room fell silent, everyone absorbing his words. Obama was the first to respond, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That sounds like exactly what's needed," he said, nodding in approval. Trump could feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he felt the clarity he had been missing. He knew the road ahead would still be full of challenges. But he also knew that as long as he stayed true to the mission and remained grounded in what truly mattered, the initiative could accomplish even more than it already had. In the days that followed, the focus of the initiative shifted. The partnerships with government entities were maintained, but the emphasis on grassroots, veteran-centered support became more pronounced. Trump traveled across the country, speaking directly with veterans, listening to their needs, and reaffirming his commitment to their future. The initiative became a symbol of hope, not just because of the policies, but because it was driven by the people it was meant to serve. As the initiative continued to grow, the impact on veterans was undeniable. They were receiving the resources they needed, but they were also gaining something more: a voice, a chance to rebuild their lives on their terms, with the support of a movement that wasn't about politics, but about people. Trump, now more confident than ever in his leadership, couldn't help but think back to that pivotal conversation with General Matthews. It had been a test of character, a reminder that, no matter how great the initiative became, the focus could never stray from its true purpose: serving those who had served the nation. As the Veterans Initiative continued to flourish, the program began attracting not only widespread attention but also opposition. What had initially been hailed as a groundbreaking effort began to face more scrutiny from both the political right and left. Some viewed it as a diversion from traditional political agendas, while others questioned its efficiency and long-term sustainability. Trump had always prided himself on his ability to weather criticism. However, this time felt different. The veterans were counting on the success of the initiative, and the political infighting threatened to derail all the progress that had been made. He had to act swiftly, before the momentum was lost. It all came to a head during a heated debate in Washington. Trump and Obama had been invited to speak before a joint session of Congress, where their Veterans Initiative was supposed to be showcased as a model of bipartisan cooperation. But as the speeches began, the opposition came out in full force. "Mr. President," a senator from the opposing party began, his voice sharp, "while we appreciate the effort, we must question the fiscal responsibility of this program. The money allocated for this initiative could be better spent elsewhere. Why should we invest in a program that, frankly, has not been proven to work?" Trump, sitting in the front row, clenched his fists. The words felt like a personal attack on everything he had worked for. He looked over at Obama, who remained calm, his hands resting on the podium as he prepared to speak. Before Obama could respond, a voice interrupted. "That's exactly the problem," another senator added. "This initiative has become a political talking point, not a real solution. We need measurable outcomes, not just speeches." The tension in the room was palpable. Trump's thoughts raced as he tried to figure out how to defuse the situation. If he responded directly, it could escalate into a full-blown political confrontation, but if he stayed silent, it would give the opposition even more ammunition. Just as he was about to stand, Obama leaned over and whispered, "Let me take this one, Donald." Trump hesitated but nodded. He had faith in Obama's ability to calm the room and bring the conversation back to the real issue: the veterans. Obama stood tall, his voice measured but firm. "I understand the concerns being raised. I do. We all want to ensure that this initiative is effective and that it uses taxpayer dollars wisely. But let me be clear, this isn't about politics. It's about people. It's about the men and women who have served this country and who now need our help to rebuild their lives. I've seen the work being done, and I've spoken to veterans firsthand. What we're doing here, together, is saving lives. The room was silent as Obama continued, his words resonating with the senators and representatives present. We have set clear benchmarks for success. We're not asking for a blank check. We're asking for the opportunity to make a real difference. And yes, there will be bumps along the way. But if we don't start taking action now, we risk losing the chance to help thousands of veterans who have already waited far too long. Trump watched Obama with a sense of respect and admiration. He had expected a political answer, but instead, Obama had refocused the conversation entirely. The message was clear. This wasn't about winning a political battle. It was about a moral obligation to the veterans who had served their country. When Obama finished speaking, Trump stood and joined him at the podium. The two men shared a brief glance before Trump addressed the room. His voice was calm but resolute. Obama's right. This isn't just about programs or funding. It's about delivering real solutions to people who've given everything for this country. It's time we stop talking and start doing. The senators and representatives were silent, some nodding in agreement. Others, though still skeptical, remained quiet, choosing not to escalate further. Trump and Obama had made their case, and for the moment, they had won the room. But the battle was far from over. As the press conference wrapped up and the cameras turned off, Trump knew the real challenge was just beginning. The political opposition would only grow louder, and there were many who would not rest until the initiative had been dismantled or watered down beyond recognition. Don, who had been standing in the back of the room, approached Trump after the press conference. "That was powerful," Don said, his voice low. "But this isn't the end. We need to keep up the pressure." Trump nodded. "I know, but we've got something they can't ignore. Results? The veterans are getting the help they need. The numbers don't lie." In the days that followed, Trump and Obama worked behind the scenes, preparing for a new round of hearings, meetings, and public appearances. But this time, they decided to take a different approach. They would bring the veterans themselves into the conversation. Instead of allowing the debate to be centered solely around policies and budgets, they began inviting veterans to speak directly to Congress. It was a bold move, but Trump knew that if the lawmakers were forced to listen to the very people whose lives were being impacted by the initiative, it would be harder for them to dismiss the program. The first veteran to speak was Private First Class Sarah Martinez, a young woman who had served in Afghanistan and struggled to readjust to civilian life after her service. She stood before the committee, her hands shaking slightly, but her voice was strong. "When I came back from Afghanistan, I didn't know where to turn. I couldn't find a job. I couldn't get the support I needed," Sarah said, her eyes filled with emotion. "But then, I found this initiative, and it helped me get back on my feet. It gave me hope again. It gave me a future." Her words were raw, powerful, and personal. The room was silent as Sarah finished speaking, and for the first time in weeks, there was a palpable shift in the air. The days that followed saw more veterans speaking out. Their stories were a wake-up call, forcing Congress to confront the realities of what it meant to support the men and women who had served in the military. The pressure mounted on both sides of the political aisle as they were forced to take a hard look at their priorities. Trump and Obama stood side by side throughout the process, unified in their mission to keep the Veterans Initiative alive and thriving. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were determined. The veterans had entrusted them with their futures, and they weren't about to let them down. As the initiative gained even more traction, with bipartisan support finally growing, Trump knew that the fight wasn't over. But now, the program wasn't just an idea, it was a movement. One that had the potential to change the way the country viewed its veterans forever. The Veterans Initiative was gaining momentum, but not without its new set of challenges. The political landscape was shifting, and Trump's leadership was continuously being tested. For the first time in years, he found himself facing deep internal conflict. This was no longer just a policy initiative, it was a mission, one that had the potential to reshape his legacy. Every morning, Trump woke up to a new set of headlines. Some were supportive of his efforts to improve the lives of veterans, while others painted him as an opportunist. Despite the growing support from both Democrats and Republicans, the whispers of doubt about his true intentions continued to haunt him. Was this just another political maneuver for him to gain favor, or was it a cause he truly believed in? The answer, Trump realized, depended on the actions that followed. It was early one morning when Trump received an unexpected call. It was from a trusted ally, former Secretary of State Henry Turner. Henry had always been a voice of reason in Trump's ear, a steady hand when the pressure got too overwhelming. "Donald," Henry began, his voice grim, "I've been following the latest reports. This initiative of yours, it's getting bigger, but the financials are starting to show cracks. The numbers don't add up in some places. You're under pressure, and this could spiral out of control if you're not careful." Trump paused, feeling the weight of the words. He had known things were getting complicated, but hearing it directly from Henry made the reality undeniable. The initiative had grown so fast that certain aspects were now under intense scrutiny. "I know, Henry, but what's the alternative? We can't just abandon it now. The veterans need us." "I'm not saying abandon it," Henry replied, his voice softening, "but you need to reassess. You're walking a fine line between maintaining momentum and overextending. The last thing you need is to be seen as using this to distract from your other objectives. Take a step back. Think about how you want to move forward." The conversation left Trump unsettled. He knew Henry had a point. His leadership was being scrutinized from all angles, and it wasn't just about veterans anymore. It was about his image, his future in politics, and his reputation. The pressure was mounting, and he could no longer ignore the fact that the initiative was pulling him in multiple directions. Trump stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. It was moments like this that he knew would define his legacy. How he responded when everything seemed to be on the line. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was an alert about the latest polling data on the initiative. The numbers were solid, with a growing number of voters supporting the cause, but the political pundits were growing louder in their criticisms. Some questioned Trump's sincerity, others believed Obama was the true driver of the initiative's success. But one headline stood out above the rest: Trump and Obama, a partnership on the brink? Later that day, Trump found himself once again in the heart of Washington, attending a closed-door strategy session with his advisors. His mind kept drifting back to the conversations he'd had with Henry and Obama, both of whom had pointed out the precarious position he was in. Obama entered the room first, offering a small smile as he took his seat beside Trump. It was clear the two men were still working in tandem, but there was a noticeable distance between them now, a subtle shift in their dynamic. "Trump, I know this is getting harder," Obama began, his tone serious, "but I believe in what we've built. We've done something extraordinary. It's not about the headlines or the critics. It's about the people we're helping." Trump looked at him, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "I agree, but I can't ignore what's happening. We've got to be careful about how we move forward. Every step we take, the stakes keep rising." "I understand," Obama said, his voice softening, "but we've made a commitment to these veterans, and we can't back down now. The focus needs to stay on them, not the political fallout." Trump nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads. He had poured so much into this initiative, and yet, he was constantly being reminded that nothing in politics came without a price. He had learned that lesson many times over the years. The pressure continued to build. The opposition grew more vocal, attacking the initiative from all sides. Trump was accused of using the veterans' cause as a political tool, while his supporters were growing more concerned about the rising costs of the program. Despite the growing support from the American public, Trump knew the political game had become far more complicated than he'd ever anticipated. Don called later that evening, sensing his father's unease. "Dad, you've been distant lately," Don said, his voice concerned. "What's going on?" Trump exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "I'm trying to figure out how to move forward. We've got the momentum, but everything's becoming so political. There's pressure from all sides, and I don't know how to keep everyone satisfied without losing sight of what matters." "Dad, the answer's simple," Don replied. "Stop worrying about the politics. You've always been about results. Just focus on getting them. No matter what anyone says, the veterans are the priority. The rest will follow." Trump was silent for a moment. He had always prided himself on focusing on results, but this situation felt different. The stakes were higher. The lives of thousands of veterans were on the line, and he couldn't afford to let this slip away. As the weeks passed, Trump made a decision. The Veterans Initiative would be his singular focus. He would stop pandering to the critics, and instead, he would double down on the work that had made the program successful in the first place. With Obama's continued support and the help of his closest allies, Trump began redirecting his efforts back to the ground level, ensuring that the veterans who had fought for the country were receiving the support they had earned. But even with a renewed sense of purpose, Trump couldn't ignore the fact that the political pressures were mounting. Every decision, every move he made, would be scrutinized. His legacy was on the line. And in the end, Trump knew he would have to make a choice: to continue with the program, risking everything for the veterans, or to walk away and save face in the political arena. The next chapter of his journey was still unwritten. The road ahead would be difficult, but Trump wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The question remained: would this initiative end up being his crowning achievement or his greatest political gamble? The weeks following Trump's decision to double down on the Veterans Initiative were filled with intense work and sleepless nights. Every day, he received briefings, met with key allies, and made countless phone calls to veterans groups across the country. He was no longer just a politician trying to push through a policy. He had become an advocate, a fighter for the cause he knew would define his legacy. But as much as he threw himself into the work, the challenges continued to mount. One evening, as Trump sat in the Oval Office, poring over the latest reports, he heard a knock on the door. It was Don, his son, holding a file of documents. "Dad, I know you've been buried in this for weeks now, but there's something I need to show you." "It's urgent," Don said, setting the file on the desk. Trump looked up, his face weary but still focused. "What is it?" Trump asked, gesturing for Don to take a seat. Don slid the file over and opened it, revealing a series of reports detailing the financial status of the Veterans Initiative. At first glance, Trump noticed a troubling trend. Costs were rising faster than expected, and there were discrepancies in some of the fund allocations. This can't be right," Trump muttered, scanning the pages. "Are you telling me there's fraud in the program?" Don shook his head. "I don't know yet, but there are irregularities. Someone's been playing fast and loose with the money. It's still early, but we need to look into it fast." Trump's stomach sank. For the first time in weeks, doubt crept in. He had trusted the people running the initiative, and the idea that someone might be taking advantage of the program left a bitter taste in his mouth. This wasn't just a political problem. It was personal. The following days were a blur of meetings, investigations, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. Trump assembled a team of trusted allies to dig into the financials, with Don leading the charge. Meanwhile, Trump continued to meet with veterans, listening to their stories and reaffirming his commitment to the cause. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everything could come crashing down. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the problem was bigger than anyone had anticipated. Several key figures in the program had been misappropriating funds, redirecting money meant for veteran services into personal accounts. It wasn't a small amount, it was millions of dollars. Trump was livid. He had always prided himself on his ability to spot corruption, but this betrayal felt personal. The very people he had trusted to carry out his vision had betrayed him, and more importantly, they had betrayed the veterans. One evening, after a particularly long day of reviewing evidence, Trump sat alone in the White House dining room. The weight of the situation was becoming unbearable. His legacy was on the line, and so was the future of the Veterans Initiative. He had to make a choice: expose the corruption, or sweep it under the rug and risk everything being destroyed. As he sat there, deep in thought, his phone rang. It was Obama. "Donald," Obama's voice came through the line. "Calm as always. I know what's happening. You've got to make the right call here. If you expose the corruption, it will be painful, but in the long run, it will show the public that you're serious about the veterans. You won't just be a politician anymore. You'll be a leader." Trump exhaled, his voice tight. "I know, but it's not just about the politics anymore. It's about the people who have trusted me, the veterans. If I expose this, I'm putting everything on the line." "Exactly," Obama replied. "But think about this. If you don't do it, you'll be just like the rest of them. It's your choice, Donald. You've built something incredible here. Don't let corruption destroy it. Trump knew Obama was right. The path ahead would be difficult, but if he allowed the corruption to continue unchecked, it would not only destroy the Veterans Initiative, it would destroy everything he had worked for. The next day, Trump held a press conference. The cameras were rolling, and the room was packed with reporters eager for any glimpse of the ongoing scandal. Trump stepped up to the podium, his expression resolute but weary. The silence in the room was palpable. "I have always been a fighter," Trump began, his voice steady. "And I have always believed in transparency and accountability. It is with a heavy heart that I stand before you today to announce that an investigation into the Veterans Initiative has uncovered a significant amount of fraud." There were gasps from the reporters, but Trump continued. "People who were entrusted to run this program have betrayed the very veterans they were supposed to serve. These actions are unacceptable. The people responsible will be held accountable, and the funds will be returned to the veterans who need them most." Trump paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. "This isn't just a setback. This is a wake-up call. But I will not let this corruption define the Veterans Initiative. We will rebuild. We will ensure that this program lives up to the promise we made to our veterans." The fallout was swift. The media covered the story from every angle, and both sides of the political spectrum weighed in. Some praised Trump for taking swift action, while others criticized him for letting the situation get so out of control. But the truth remained. He had exposed the corruption, and he had committed to fixing it. Behind closed doors, the work began. Trump worked with his team, alongside Obama and key congressional allies, to overhaul the Veterans Initiative. They brought in new leadership, revamped financial oversight, and created stronger safeguards to ensure that no one could exploit the system again. But it wasn't just about fixing the program. It was about earning back the trust of the veterans. Trump visited military hospitals, held town halls, and met with the families of fallen soldiers. Slowly but surely, he began to repair the damage. The road ahead remained challenging, but for the first time in months, Trump felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the journey wasn't over, but he had made the right choice. He had faced the hardest moment of his presidency and come out stronger on the other side. And as he looked ahead, he realized something. This wasn't just about veterans. It was about leadership, about doing what was right even when the stakes were high. This was the moment that would define his legacy. The storm of controversy that had surrounded Trump's announcement of corruption within the Veterans Initiative had finally begun to settle. The media frenzy had peaked, but now, the true work began. The task ahead was monumental: rebuilding trust, restoring the integrity of the program, and making sure the veterans, those who had risked everything for the country, received the support they had been promised. Trump was resolute in his mission, and he wasn't alone. The investigation had revealed a network of corruption that stretched far deeper than anyone had imagined, and the fallout was still unfolding. Some key figures had been arrested, others resigned in disgrace, but the damage had been done. The veterans were waiting, their hopes tied to the very program that had been betrayed. In the days that followed, Trump met with his team, his closest advisors, key veterans advocates, and new financial experts who would help steer the program back on track. A sense of urgency permeated every conversation. Time was of the essence, and failure was not an option. "Donald, we've got to act fast," Don said, his voice sharp as he reviewed the reports. "There's no time to waste. The veterans are watching us. They need to see action, not just talk." Trump nodded, his face hard with determination. He had known Don would be the one to push him forward, to remind him of the bigger picture. "I know. We're not just fixing the program. We're fixing our reputation. We can't afford to fall short." That evening, after a full day of meetings, Trump sat down for dinner with his family. It was a rare moment of quiet, but even then, he couldn't escape the weight of the situation. As he looked around the table, he saw not just his children but his allies, his team. They were all in this together. Ivanka, his eldest daughter, spoke up, breaking the silence. "Dad, you've got this. You've faced challenges before, and you've always come out stronger on the other side." Trump smiled faintly, grateful for her support. "I appreciate that, Ivanka. But this is different. We're talking about people's lives, their trust. If we don't get this right, Everything we've worked for could be lost. You've got the right people around you, Don added. You've built something good with this initiative, and it's not going to be destroyed by a few bad actors. We just have to show people that you're in this for the long haul. The next morning, Trump gathered his team for a strategy session. The plan was clear. They would roll out a comprehensive overhaul of the initiative, making transparency and accountability the cornerstones of its future. New leadership would be brought in, new protocols put in place to prevent future fraud, and, most importantly, the focus would be put back where it belonged, on the veterans. Trump addressed the group with the urgency he had been feeling for weeks. We need to rebuild, and we need to do it in a way that ensures no one will ever doubt our commitment to the veterans again. This is about restoring trust. The team was ready. Everyone knew their role, and the work began immediately. The first step was to rebuild the program's financial oversight. An external auditing team would be brought in to ensure every dollar was accounted for and that the money was being spent in ways that truly benefited the veterans. The second step was to create a series of public forums, town halls, and meetings where veterans and their families could voice their concerns and see the changes being made in real time. A week later, Trump took the stage at the first town hall, a sense of anticipation in the air. The event was being broadcasted live across the country, and veterans from all corners of the nation tuned in to hear what the president would say. "Thank you for joining me today," Trump began, his voice steady. "I know the past few months have been difficult, and I know that many of you have felt betrayed. But I stand here before you today with a commitment to fix what's been broken. The corruption we uncovered will not define us. We will rebuild, and we will do it together." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "I promise you this. The veterans who have served this country will get the support and respect they deserve. We will not rest until we have earned back your trust." There was a murmur in the crowd, and Trump could feel the weight of their eyes upon him. But he didn't flinch. He had made his promise, and now it was time to deliver. In the weeks that followed, the initiative underwent a complete transformation. The new leadership, chosen for their integrity and commitment to the cause, worked tirelessly to right the wrongs of the past. The public forums gave veterans a chance to speak their minds, and Trump personally attended several, listening to their stories, their grievances, and their hopes. The results were slow but steady. Trust was being rebuilt, but it would take time. Every positive story about veterans receiving the care they needed, every new program that was successfully implemented, served as a reminder that Trump's commitment to the cause was not just about politics. It was about doing what was right. But it wasn't just about the veterans. The entire country was watching. Trump knew that the initiative had become a litmus test, not just for his leadership, but for his ability to deliver on his promises. The political capital he had invested in the program was vast, and its success or failure would have far-reaching implications for his future. The pressure weighed heavily on him, but there were moments when he felt the sense of purpose that had driven him to pursue the initiative in the first place. Every veteran who walked out of a clinic with the care they needed, every family who received the benefits they had earned, was a small victory. And then, one afternoon, Trump received a call from a former veteran who had become an outspoken advocate for the program. The man's voice was gruff but sincere. "Mr. President, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been fighting for my benefits for years, and thanks to the changes you've made, I'm finally getting the help I need. You've done good, sir. You've done good." It was the kind of call Trump had hoped for, the kind of call that reminded him why he had taken on this fight in the first place. It wasn't just about the headlines or the political calculations. It was about making a difference. Later that evening, as Trump sat alone in the Oval Office, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The journey had been long and filled with obstacles, but he knew one thing for sure. He had made the right choice. Despite the trials and tribulations, despite the controversies and setbacks, he had remained committed to the cause. And in that commitment, he had found something even more valuable than political success: a sense of purpose, a reminder of what true leadership looked like. For Trump, the Veterans Initiative was no longer just a policy. It was his mission. As he looked out the window, watching the sun set over Washington, Trump knew that this was far from the end of the road. The work was ongoing, the journey was still unfolding, and there was still much to be done. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of the world begin to lift, knowing he had chosen the right path. As the months passed, The Veterans Initiative gradually gained traction. The reforms, though difficult, were starting to take hold. More veterans were receiving the care and benefits they deserved, and the once-tainted program was showing signs of recovery. But just as Trump felt like he was on the verge of turning the corner, an unexpected twist arrived in the form of an old rival, a figure who had once been one of his harshest critics, but now seemed to be offering an olive branch. It all began with a phone call. It was a late afternoon when Trump's phone buzzed on the desk. The number flashing on the screen was one he didn't expect. It was Barack Obama. Trump had known Obama for years, but their relationship had been strained, particularly during the heat of the election and throughout their respective presidencies. Their exchanges were often tense, even hostile at times, but Trump always respected Obama's intellect and ability to navigate complex political waters. Donald, Obama's voice came through, calm and collected as ever. I've been watching your work on the Veterans Initiative. I have to say, I'm impressed. It's not easy to turn something like that around, especially with all the media attention and political pressure. You've done something important here. Trump leaned back in his chair, a little taken aback. Barack, you're the last person I expected to hear from. You've had your criticisms over the years. What's changed? Obama chuckled softly. Well, I'm not here to score political points, Donald. I'm here because I think we need to talk about something. I've been involved in veterans' issues before, and there's a bigger picture we should be paying attention to. If we're going to make lasting change, we need more than just reforms. We need a unified front, and you need help. Trump sat forward in his chair. Help? From you? You're one of the guys who's tried to take me down for years. What's in it for you? Obama's voice remained steady. The future of the Veterans Program. If we really want to make sure this works, we have to bring in everyone. Republicans, Democrats, veterans groups, and the public. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about getting it right. I'm willing to put the past behind us if it means working together. Trump paused, the weight of Obama's offer hanging in the air. The idea of working with a former rival was both daunting and, in a strange way, appealing. Could this partnership truly move the needle? Would it be the breakthrough the Veterans Initiative needed? I don't know, Trump replied. It's risky. I've got my own team, and I'm not sure I want to trust someone who's been so opposed to everything I've stood for. Obama's tone shifted, becoming more persuasive. I get it. Trust doesn't come easy. But think about it. This could be your legacy, taking a program that was broken and fixing it in a way that no one expected. You've always said you're different. This is your chance to prove it. Trump spent the next few days mulling over Obama's proposal. He wasn't one to easily back down or trust people, especially not someone from the opposing party who had often criticized him publicly. But there was something about the way Obama had framed the conversation. It wasn't about politics. It was about results. It was about the veterans, and Trump knew he couldn't afford to let pride or old grudges stand in the way of success. Eventually, Trump decided to make the call. The two men met at a neutral location, an undisclosed hotel in Washington, away from the public eye. Trump entered the room first, his usual confident stride tempered by the gravity of the situation. Obama was already there, sitting at a table, waiting. Barack, Trump said as he extended a hand. You sure know how to get someone's attention. Obama smiled, standing up to shake his hand. I know how to get things done when it matters. Let's not waste time, Donald. We're both here for the same thing. The two sat down and began to talk, moving quickly through the details. Obama proposed a framework for collaboration, one that would unite both sides of the political spectrum under a shared goal of improving the veterans program. It was a plan that called for bipartisan support, public transparency, and, most importantly, a focus on real, tangible results for the veterans. Trump was skeptical, but he listened intently, weighing each point. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was bold. And for the first time in a long while, Trump felt like the pieces were coming together in a way that could actually work. After a few hours of back and forth, Trump nodded slowly. All right, Barack. You've got yourself a deal. Let's make this work. Obama smiled, a rare moment of mutual respect between the two men. I'm glad to hear it. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but if we can make this happen, it will be worth it. Over the next several weeks, The partnership between Trump and Obama became a symbol of what could be achieved when political rivals set aside their differences for a common cause. Their teams worked tirelessly together, crafting new policies, securing funding, and reaching out to veterans organizations to make sure the reforms were implemented effectively. The public reaction was mixed at first. Some hailed the collaboration as a sign of progress, while others criticized it as a political stunt. But Trump didn't let the noise distract him. He kept his eyes on the prize, ensuring that the veterans were taken care of, no matter the political fallout. One afternoon, after a particularly successful roundtable discussion with veterans groups, Trump received another call from Obama. This time, it was to deliver some good news. "Donald, the numbers are looking great," Obama said. "The reforms are starting to have a real impact. The veterans are seeing the results, and the support for the program is stronger than ever. You've done something incredible here." Trump smiled, his voice laced with a rare sense of pride. "It wasn't just me, Barack. It was the team, and it was the veterans. They're the real heroes here." Obama laughed. "You're right, but I think we can both agree that this is something special. It's not often you see something like this, a former president and a current one working side by side to make a real difference. We've made history, Donald." As the months passed, the Veterans Initiative continued to thrive. The reforms were becoming permanent fixtures, and the trust that had been lost was being slowly but surely restored. The program was no longer just a symbol of Trump's presidency. It had become a living testament to what could be achieved when people put aside their differences for a common goal. In the end, Trump realized something important. The partnership with Obama wasn't just about politics. It was about leadership, about finding common ground, and about doing what was right for the country. And as he looked back on the journey, he knew this unlikely alliance had been the turning point. It had been the catalyst for something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. The Veterans Initiative was now being hailed as a success, not just a political win for Trump or Obama, but a true, measurable improvement for the veterans who had long been neglected by the system. The partnership between Trump and Obama had, against all odds, sparked a revolution within the program. The press that once vilified Trump for the scandal surrounding it now praised him for his resilience and determination to turn it around. But even as the country began to shift its opinion on Trump, things were starting to change within the inner circle. As public opinion began to turn in his favor, he found himself confronted with new challenges, ones that went beyond policy and public perception. With success came expectations, and the pressure was mounting. It was a rainy Wednesday when Trump sat in the Oval Office, staring at the stack of files in front of him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of weariness creeping in. The Veterans Initiative was running smoothly, but other parts of his presidency were starting to demand more of his attention. Foreign policy, economic reform, and, perhaps most critically, the upcoming election. Every move he made was scrutinized, and despite all the progress, his critics were still relentless. As his mind drifted, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen was familiar. His son, Don Jr. "Hey, Dad. I need to talk to you about something," Don Jr. said, his voice filled with urgency. Trump straightened up, his attention fully on the conversation. "What's going on?" "It's about the Veterans Initiative," Don Jr. replied. "I've been hearing from some people close to the program. There's a growing concern that the bipartisan approach is starting to dilute the results. Some of the folks who were initially on board are beginning to get cold feet, thinking the changes are too slow." Trump paused, processing the information. "So, you're telling me there's a backlash building from our own supporters?" "Exactly. The voters who've backed you are starting to wonder if you're compromising too much. They want more. Faster results." Trump sighed, rubbing his temple. "I knew this would happen. People expect instant gratification. The truth is, real change takes time. But if they don't see the results quickly enough, they'll think I've failed." As Trump pondered the growing tension within his team, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Ivanka, her usual composure replaced by a rare look of concern. "Dad," she said softly, "I think we need to have a serious conversation. About the election, about the future of the veterans program, and about where we go from here." Trump leaned back in his chair. "I know. It's a lot to juggle right now, but I don't think we're anywhere near done with the Veterans Initiative. Not by a long shot." "I agree," Ivanka said, taking a seat. But we need to find a way to balance things. If we push too hard with the veterans program, we might alienate the people who've been with us from the beginning. But if we don't push hard enough, we risk losing momentum. We need to find that sweet spot. Trump nodded, her words hitting home. It's a tightrope walk, and every decision I make will have consequences. Later that day, Trump held a private meeting with his closest advisors. They went over the latest polling data, examining the areas where his support had been strong and where it had begun to slip. The numbers were telling. The Veterans Initiative was indeed popular, but it wasn't the only issue on voters' minds. The economy, foreign relations, and even personal scandals were beginning to chip away at the unity he had once enjoyed. "We need a bold move," said one of his senior advisors. "Something that resonates with both veterans and the broader electorate. The question is, what do we do next?" Trump leaned forward, a spark of realization lighting his eyes. "The election is looming, and we're not done yet. We've got one more piece to the puzzle, the economy. It's time to push for an economic policy that complements what we've done for the veterans. If we can show the country that we're solving both their financial concerns and their long-term needs, we might just secure this thing." The next week, Trump gave a groundbreaking speech on economic reform. He tied it directly to the Veterans Initiative, arguing that a strong economy was key to providing long-term, sustainable benefits for veterans. His message was clear. A robust economic plan would ensure the government had the resources to support veterans for generations to come. "The future of our nation depends on the strength of our economy," Trump declared to a packed room of supporters and media. "But the future of our veterans depends on a government that is willing to prioritize their needs. We are doing both, and we are doing it now." The response was overwhelming. The combination of veterans' support and economic policy struck a chord with voters who had been on the fence. Trump's approval ratings began to rise as the initiative continued to gain ground. But just as he felt the momentum shift, he received a shocking call. It was from a source he hadn't expected to hear from, one of the key figures involved in the corruption scandal that had initially rocked the veterans program. "I know you don't want to hear from me, Mr. President," the voice said, "but I think you need to know something. There are others involved in this, people who are higher up the chain. This thing goes a lot deeper than anyone thought." Trump's blood ran cold. For a moment, he was silent, unsure of how to respond. He had fought tooth and nail to clear the veterans program of corruption, and now, this? It was an ominous reminder that even when the surface seemed calm, there were still storms brewing beneath. "What do you know?" Trump asked, his tone low and measured. The man on the other end of the line didn't waste any time. "I've got proof. Evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in Washington. And I think you need to act quickly before it gets out of hand." Trump hung up the phone, a deep sense of unease settling over him. This was bigger than just political infighting. If the corruption ran deeper than even he had imagined, the integrity of the Veterans Initiative and everything he had worked for could be jeopardized once again. He picked up the phone and dialed Ivanka. "We've got a new problem," he said, his voice tinged with a rare vulnerability. "It's about to get complicated." The journey ahead was uncertain. The stakes were higher than ever. But Trump knew one thing for sure. The fight for the Veterans Initiative was far from over. The weight of the conversation with his mysterious informant hung over Trump like a dark cloud. His thoughts raced as he stood alone in the Oval Office, the files on his desk now feeling like an afterthought. The Veterans Initiative, his hard-fought political success, was now teetering on the edge of an abyss. Could he really trust that the corruption was isolated to just a few bad actors? Or was the entire program rotten, beyond what even he could have imagined? Ivanka arrived at the White House just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. She could tell by the tense set of her father's jaw that something was wrong. "Dad," she said quietly, taking a seat across from him. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Trump exhaled deeply, pushing aside the papers he had been absent-mindedly flipping through. "It's bigger than we thought. The corruption in the veterans program, it's not just a few rogue players. It's deep, Ivanka. I've got a source telling me that the whole thing is more compromised than we ever knew." Ivanka's face fell, but she didn't flinch. "You mean, it's not over?" "No," Trump muttered. his voice low and grave. "It's far from over. I thought we had cleaned house, but there are still people pulling the strings from the top." She stared at him for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what he was saying. The Veterans Program, which had been a symbol of his political redemption, now threatened to unravel in front of him. "So, what do we do?" she asked, her tone firm and decisive. "You've worked too hard to let this slip away." Trump's eyes narrowed. "We find out who's behind this. We go after the people who think they're untouchable, and we expose them, no matter who they are." The next few days were a blur of tense meetings, quiet whispers, and clandestine phone calls. Trump set up a task force within his administration to investigate the depth of the corruption. Led by his closest confidants, it was an operation that would be conducted in secrecy. If word got out, it could undermine everything he had worked for. But as the investigation deepened, it became clear that this wasn't just about isolated corruption within the Veterans Program. The network of insiders reached into the highest echelons of government. There were figures in Congress, private contractors, and influential lobbyists all involved in an intricate web of deceit. And as they pulled on the threads, the story began to unravel, each revelation darker than the last. One evening, after a long day of sifting through evidence, Trump found himself standing in front of a map of Washington, D.C., his finger tracing the connections between the key players involved. It was like a game of chess, but with stakes much higher than any political maneuver he had ever made before. Ivanka entered, her expression unreadable. "Have you found anything?" she asked softly. "More than I bargained for," Trump said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's bigger than the Veterans Program. This goes straight to the heart of the swamp, politicians and power brokers making deals in the shadows. People I thought I could trust are part of this, Ivanka." She stepped closer, her face serious. "Are you sure about all of this? If we go public, it could bring everything crashing down. Not just for you, but for the country." "I know," Trump replied grimly. "But if I don't act now, the Veterans Program, everything we've done, will be tainted. We've already come so far. I can't let these people destroy it all." As the investigation grew more intense, so did the political pressure. The media, which had once hailed the veterans' reforms as a triumph, was now turning its attention back to the rumors of corruption. Some outlets speculated that Trump's alliance with Obama had been nothing more than a political ploy to distract from the scandals festering within his administration. The attacks were relentless. Trump's opponents saw an opportunity to undermine his entire legacy, and the mounting accusations began to weigh heavily on him. Even members of his own party started to distance themselves, fearful of being tainted by the controversy. But Trump refused to back down. He doubled down on the investigation, demanding answers from his team. One night, just as he was preparing to turn in for the evening, his phone rang. It was the lead investigator on the task force. "Mr. President," the voice on the other end said, "we've found something. Something big. You need to see this immediately." The following morning, Trump sat in a secure briefing room, a set of documents laid out in front of him. His eyes scanned the pages quickly, his mind processing the details. The evidence was damning. It was clear now that some of the individuals involved in the corruption had been using the Veterans Program as a front for illegal activities, laundering money, kickbacks, and shady deals with defense contractors. "This goes straight to the top," Trump said quietly, his mind reeling as he absorbed the enormity of the situation. "We have to take action." But just as he was preparing to move forward with the next steps, another phone call came through. It was from his informant, the one who had initially tipped him off about the corruption. "Mr. President, you need to be careful," the voice warned. "There are people involved in this who are more powerful than you think. They won't stop until they see you taken down." Trump paused, the weight of the words sinking in. Who are these people? Who's behind all this? The informant's voice grew urgent. "I can't say everything right now, but I'll meet you tomorrow. In person. Just make sure no one's following you." Trump spent the night restless, unable to shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. He knew the stakes had never been higher. His legacy, the Veterans Initiative, even his presidency could be on the line. And as the dawn broke over Washington, D.C., he knew that the next day would determine everything. The following day dawned with an unsettling sense of tension hanging in the air. Trump had never felt so on edge. As the sun rose over the White House, its rays illuminating the stark contrast between triumph and turmoil, he knew that today would either solidify his victory or shatter everything he had built. He arrived at the designated meeting place, a quiet, nondescript diner on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. The streets were unusually empty, and the stillness only added to the weight of what was to come. Trump was alone, save for his trusted bodyguard who kept a careful distance, watching for any sign of danger. Inside, he was met by his informant, a man who had once been part of the tangled web of corruption but now appeared disheveled, fearful, and with eyes that spoke of the danger he was about to expose. "Mr. President," the man whispered, lowering his voice as he slid into the booth across from Trump, "I hope you're ready for what's coming. This is bigger than we ever imagined." Trump leaned forward, his expression intense. "I've been ready for a long time. But what's bigger than what we already know? Who's really behind this?" The informant glanced nervously over his shoulder, checking for any signs of eavesdropping, before he spoke in a hushed tone. "The people behind the corruption. This isn't just about money or politics. It's about power. They have ties to some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. Names you wouldn't believe. They've been manipulating everything behind the scenes, using the Veterans Program as a smokescreen for a global scheme." Trump's heart skipped a beat. The depth of what was being implied felt almost too vast to comprehend. "Are you saying this goes beyond Washington? Global?" The informant nodded gravely. "Yes, Mr. President. Think of it as a web of influence stretching across continents. The people involved are using the military-industrial complex to siphon off resources, manipulate policies, and control entire industries. The Veterans Program was just a tool in a much larger operation." Trump absorbed this in silence, the weight of the world settling heavily on his shoulders. The fight he thought he was waging to clean up a corrupt Veterans Program had, in fact, been part of a far-reaching conspiracy. A conspiracy so vast that even his own position could be at risk. "I need names," Trump said, his voice sharp. The informant hesitated, clearly torn between fear and loyalty. "I've got a list. It's not complete yet, but it's enough to get started. But here's the problem. These people have eyes everywhere. If you make one wrong move, you could be exposing yourself and everyone involved in a way that's irreversible." Trump's jaw clenched. He had always been a man of action, someone who thrived in high-stakes situations. But this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. This wasn't just politics. This was a battle for control, for the future of the country itself. "I've made wrong moves before," Trump said with a cold smile, "but I've always bounced back. This time, I won't fail." That afternoon, Trump held an emergency meeting in the Oval Office, gathering his most trusted advisors. The room was filled with tension, each person aware that the future of the Veterans Initiative, and possibly their careers, hinged on the decisions made in the next few hours. The task force that had been investigating the corruption now had concrete leads, but as they presented their findings, it became clear that they were up against far more than they had anticipated. There were names, documents, and connections. Evidence that pointed to key political figures, corporate moguls, and even foreign governments, all pulling the strings from behind the curtain. "We need to act fast," one of Trump's senior advisors said. "We've got enough to go public, but we need to be careful. These people are powerful. If they catch wind of what we're doing, they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves." Trump's gaze swept over the room, his mind calculating every possible move. "We're not just going to go public. We're going to hit them where it hurts. We'll cut off their access, expose them piece by piece, until the entire operation collapses." He paused, his voice lowering. "And we'll do it before they have a chance to retaliate." Over the next several days, the task force worked in overdrive, preparing a strategy to dismantle the corruption ring piece by piece. But just as they were preparing to take the next step, the first signs of retaliation came. Trump received a series of anonymous messages threatening him and his family. There were whispers in the press, rumors of a scandal brewing, and reports of shady figures trying to influence key players in his administration. The enemies he had made over the years were closing in, hoping to use the Veterans Program as a final weapon to destroy him. But instead of backing down, Trump doubled down. On a rainy evening, he stood at a podium once again, addressing the American people. His face was set with determination, the weight of the world on his shoulders, but his resolve was unshaken. "My fellow Americans," he began, his voice steady, "for too long, powerful people have used the sacrifices of our veterans to line their pockets, to further their agendas. Today, I stand before you, not just as your president, but as a citizen determined to fight for the truth. I am calling for a full investigation into the corruption that has infiltrated the very program that should be protecting our heroes." The cameras flashed, capturing every word, every gesture. Trump's message was clear. He was going to expose the people behind the scheme, and he was going to do it on his terms. That afternoon, Trump held an emergency meeting in the Oval Office, gathering his most trusted advisors. The room was filled with tension, each person aware that the future of the Veterans Initiative, and possibly their careers, hinged on the decisions made in the next few hours. The task force that had been investigating the corruption now had concrete leads, but as they presented their findings, it became clear that they were up against far more than they had anticipated. There were names, documents, and connections. Evidence that pointed to key political figures, corporate moguls, and even foreign governments, all pulling the strings from behind the curtain. "We need to act fast," one of Trump's senior advisors said. "We've got enough to go public, but we need to be careful. These people are powerful. If they catch wind of what we're doing, they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves." Trump's gaze swept over the room, his mind calculating every possible move. "We're not just going to go public. We're going to hit them where it hurts. We'll cut off their access, expose them piece by piece, until the entire operation collapses." He paused, his voice lowering. "And we'll do it before they have a chance to retaliate." Over the next several days, the task force worked in overdrive, preparing a strategy to dismantle the corruption ring piece by piece. But just as they were preparing to take the next step, the first signs of retaliation came. Trump received a series of anonymous messages threatening him and his family. There were whispers in the press, rumors of a scandal brewing, and reports of shady figures trying to influence key players in his administration. The enemies he had made over the years were closing in, hoping to use the Veterans Program as a final weapon to destroy him. But instead of backing down, Trump doubled down. On a rainy evening, he stood at a podium once again, addressing the American people. His face was set with determination, the weight of the world on his shoulders, but his resolve was unshaken. "My fellow Americans," he began, his voice steady, "for too long, powerful people have used the sacrifices of our veterans to line their pockets, to further their agendas. Today, I stand before you, not just as your president, but as a citizen determined to fight for the truth. I am calling for a full investigation into the corruption that has infiltrated the very program that should be protecting our heroes." The cameras flashed, capturing every word, every gesture. Trump's message was clear. He was going to expose the people behind the scheme, and he was going to do it on his terms.